What's up guys, this is your favorite fanfic YouTuber, the Fanfic Majesty. Join my Discord if you want to chat and share your thoughts, the link is in the description. 4WP Chapter 91 Annexation, Treatment, Soon, a soft voice came from Vera. Sir, Mr. Stark has been contacted, 99. He's at Stark Villa now, 35. Hearing Vera's reply, Lynn nodded slightly. Stand up and start imitating Kamar Taj's magician, constantly drawing circles. Soon, a sparking teleportation tunnel appeared in front of Lynn. Looking at the familiar picture on the opposite side, especially the surprised eyes of Pepper and Tony, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Then step forward. In an instant, from Los Angeles to New York's Stark Villa. Well, actually, it's just a matter of words. I chatted with Kesilius before, learned the space teleportation magic they cast, and prepared to try it out. After all, the past life is very curious. Result. The past is unbearable to look back on, and in the end it was replaced by words. Rank 4's words are easy to follow, and a thought is enough to adjust the display method. Well, Lynn mainly thinks that, when he performs this trick, he looks very handsome and has a lot of personality. After stepping into Stark's villa, Lynn waved to the stunned Pepper and Tony. Then he said condescendingly, I learned this with a friend. How is it? Is it easy to use? Very handsome. There is nothing wrong with this. I learned it myself, and it is exactly the same. Lynn heard Tony say it with admiration. Who is this friend of yours? Someday you want to come over and sit together and teach me. When Lynn heard this, she could only make a haha and say next time. When people arrive, don't they reveal their secrets? Then, with a straight face, he said something serious to Pepper. Pepper, what happened? How did I see the news that Tony had a fight while he was racing? 99. Now Tony is in a lot of trouble, Pepper complained to Lynn. Lynn, help me persuade Tony. 99. During this time, he was obviously not in a good state. He made me the chairman of Star Industries and went racing. Don't you die? Hearing this, Lynn looked at Tony suspiciously. Didn't you treat him yourself? Why are you still so crazy? Tony gave him a non-negotiable look back, as if telling him again. Advertisements say what you should say, don't say what you shouldn't say. Seeing this, Lynn yelled haha and persuaded Pebble. Don't worry, I will definitely persuade Tony. He is not only responsible for himself, but more importantly, he is not responsible for you. But, I have something to look for Tony now, 35. Speaking of which, Pepper, you seem to know something, and you just left, leaving Tony and Lynn behind. Seeing this, Lynn asked Tony, what happened? Didn't I treat you with me? The physical condition should be much better. Hearing this, Tony replied with a wry smile. The target poisoning situation is serious again. Although the treatment has reduced a lot, it seems to be stimulated and constantly deepened. Speaking of which, Tony opened his chest, and Lynn clearly saw that strange black lines began to spread from his heart. I need you to heal again now. What's more troubling is that now the technology of the arc reactor has been leaked. Speaking of this, the wry smile on Tony's face became even more intense. Now, a large number of forces have begun to encircle and suppress Stark Industries. The troubles facing me are worse than I imagined. 5. Well, now the situation is also expected by Lynn, but it is basically a near miss. Ivan Vanke's attack gave Tony an opportunity to get out of the crisis. Well, the help from S.H.I.E.L.D. is indispensable. However, with the help of Xingyao Group, it should be possible to send some favors and earn a small amount of money at the same time. Mind so. Lynn spoke to Tony in a low voice. Don't worry, I'll take a look and treat you again. As for the encirclement and suppression of other forces, Xingyao Group can contact some people to help you speak. 99. The rest is up to you. Hearing this, Tony nodded heavily. Then, Lynn showed his words to Tony. Cure, soon. Tony closed his eyes slightly, as if enjoying the process of gradually reducing the toxins in his body. Soon, the healing energy disappeared. Tony opened his eyes, picked up the instrument next to him and started testing. It was found that it returned to normal, said gratefully to Lynn. I'll trouble you this time. Advertisement, 2 days later, my birthday party, don't forget to come. Hearing this, Lynn shook his head slightly and said apologetically to Tony. Sorry, Tony, I've had a few things going on lately. I'm afraid I'll be absent from your birthday party. However, I will send someone to deliver the birthday present here. Well, this birthday party, according to the historical trajectory, 80% will be messed up again. Staying there by yourself, it's not good to help, it's not good to not help, it's better not to go. Now he has more important things to prepare for. Accepted Hammer Industries. This is a big piece of fat in the whole plot. As long as Hammer Industries is annexed, even if only half of it is swallowed, the market value of Shining Star Group can at least increase to 200 billion. A full increase of about 2/3. That is, the market value of 500 billion. It is equivalent to being promoted to rank 5, and the wealth value can satisfy about half of it. By not 850. Lynn doesn't pay attention. Hearing Lynn's refusal, Tony was a little surprised, but didn't think too much. Then he waved his hand, indicating that it was okay. Only in the rain, Tony briefly chatted a few words. After seeing that there is no other thing to do, start to perform Space Shuttle. Back in Los Angeles, in my office then, he ordered to Willa Vera. Vera check. Is Ivan Vanki still in prison? Also check Hammer Industries, see all his assets and his relationship with Ivan Vanki. Okay, sir, we're investigating. Soon, Vera's voice rang in Lin's ear. Sir, according to the information inquiry, Ivan Vanki is now dead, 35. However, when investigating Hammer Industries and Justin Hammer's intelligence, I found traces of Ivan Vanki. Currently serving Hammer Industries. 35. The relevant information about Hammer Industries has been sent to your computer, 99. You can watch it anytime. Hearing this, Lin didn't make any extra expressions, went back to his seat and turned on the computer in front of him. Read the report Vera sent him. As he read, a smile formed on the corner of his mouth. After a while, Lin made a phone call and instructed her assistant Catherine. Catherine, help me call the person in the company who is responsible for investment and annexation of enterprises. Chapter 92 The Development of Xingyao, Annex Hammer. Xingyao Building, Top Office. Since the market value of Shining Star Group is over 100 million, Lin has started to build Star Shining Building belonging to Shining Star Group. The goal is a Los Angeles landmark. The group specially invited the infrastructure team from the east to build the Xingyao Building with guaranteed quality and quantity. Been staying for a month now. All members of Shining Star Group expressed their satisfaction. Now Xingyao has a huge influence in Los Angeles. As an employee of Xingyao, wearing a badge and wearing the shirt of Xingyao staff, walking on the road will make others look at it with admiration. But at the same time, because Lin, who is a top capitalist, continues to exert his strength. Everyone started to work hard as if they were on a zipper. 996 is light. Lin now has all the staff head towards 007. Well, this is also the reason why the Shining Star Group is developing rapidly. It's all because the employees of Shining Star are very hardworking. And investigate its source. On the one hand, Lin keeps asking Vera to screen high ability and potential employees on the entire network. On the other hand, Lin continues to follow his words, selecting employees who are both loyal and capable. At the same time, Lin also uses words and deeds to ensure everyone's health, so that all employees stay up late to work every day and feel refreshed. After the physical examination of the company's employees, it was found that there were basically no problems and they were very healthy. Even the anecdotes of the company were directly reported later. The harder you work, the healthier you are. There was a lot of uproar for a while, but with Lin's strength, it was suppressed. Well, that's what the top capitalists are all about. With extraordinary ability, it is so arrogant. You say, Xingyao Group, can it be successful? Now, Lin is in the conference room, watching everyone below. These are employees of the company responsible for investments and business mergers. It is also a department that Lin has focused on before. After all, with the memory of his previous life, he can discover many new opportunities. But the energy is limited, coupled with the industry is too complex. Advertisement you can only invest money to get the maximum benefit. At the same time, some competitors were directly invested in the budding stage and annexed. Or just like he did with Apple before, throwing money into the holding company, making it go bankrupt, and dominating the smartphone market. It can be said that the market value of Shining Star Group has continued to rise, and these people have contributed greatly. Some investments may not bear fruit yet, but some have already achieved initial results and have begun to give back a lot of cash flow to Shining Star Group. Well, as for the market for open-source smartphone systems, the Android system still exists, but it has become a niche system. Basically, most companies choose the chaos system of Xingyao. Xingyao's support is too great. The Android company simply can't come up with so much money to fight, and even if it can, the company behind it won't let it. Not to mention, Xingyao Group kept pulling back. Xingyao also secretly holds the shares of Android company. Although it is not a major shareholder, it is very influential. After making some decisions, Xingyao's people directly joined other shareholders and refused directly. Especially with a decision like this, which involves investing a lot of cash into a bottomless pit, it is very easy for Shining Star to convince others. As a result, the Android company can't go up or down, which is very embarrassing. These are closely related to those in the investment and corporate annexation sector. Therefore, Lin is still very satisfied with these people below. Their treatment is also quite good, and the salary and bonuses are constantly getting. Therefore, go to work more seriously, for fear of losing this hard-earned job. At this moment, Lin, looking at everyone's focused eyes, smiled and said aloud. Now, we, Shining Star Group, will face a major development opportunity. The following news is very important. Everyone needs to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Saying that, he gestured to the assistant Catherine next to him to give everyone a non-disclosure agreement. After everyone signed, Lin looked around at everyone and said solemnly. According to a reliable source, Hammer Industries, their president, Justin Hammer, will soon face jail time. When the time comes, Hammer Industries will have no one in power and will be in chaos. Good time for a formal annexation. Then, Lin looked at the people who couldn't believe it, smiled and said nothing, as if to let them digest the news. Advertisement soon. This major news directly caused the people below to start a heated discussion. Is what the boss said true? That Hammer Industries has really become a piece of fat. You must know that our company's market in the arms industry has been stuck in a bottleneck. If you can annex Hammer Industries, it will open the door all at once. 35. Yes, you are right, and Hammer Industries, the manufacturing plants and R&D personnel under it are a good complement to the Shining Star Group. 99. What you said is very true. The combination of the two can fully play the role of 1 plus 12. 35. Backquote. You said, did Hammer offend someone? Otherwise, how could such a person go to prison? Don't worry about it so much. First think about how to annex Hammer Industries on a large scale. If this is really successful, the company's bonus alone will make us rich. Lin looked at the people who were discussing intensely below, and saw that they did not fully suspect that the news was fake, and discussed it completely, and couldn't help but nodded slightly. Sure enough, after the screening of the words in the law, the loyal ones are easy to use. If those half-hearted employees really have to mess with themselves, they may even leak secrets. Mind so. Just in case, Lin said softly to everyone below. I think. Everyone below, keep your mouth shut. Well, although these people below have been screened, they are loyal to the Shining Star Group. But just in case someone said that it leaked, Lin still put a layer of backhand. As long as other people lure, these people below will be very vigilant and immediately change the subject. As time passed by, everyone below had a heated discussion, and slowly began to weaken Qian Li's. Soon, the meeting room fell silent. Seeing this, Lin said directly to the people below. On how to annex this aspect. I believe everyone's professional level, you should have a general plan in your mind. 5. Now, who will speak first? Everyone looked at each other, and a middle-aged man with a thin body stood up and said to Lin. Boss, I don't think the annexation of Hammer Industries is a problem as long as Justin is in jail. The most important thing is to prevent other capital from robbing this piece of fat. Once they start in advance, our Shining Star Group may not be able to snatch too much. So, I think, we should. Hearing the other party's suggestion, Lin couldn't help sighing. The other party was really professional. With these few tricks going on, as long as there is an accident with Justin, Hammer will be swallowed cleanly by the Xingyao Group. Chapter 93 Planning for Annexation, Anti-Thunder Forces. A week later, Shining Star Group, the chairman's office. Lin saw the message pushed on the phone, and a smile appeared on her face. Hammer Industries has won a large-scale order from Shining Star Group, and its stock price has skyrocketed. Hammer Industries has in-depth cooperation with Shining Star Group. Shining Star Group expressed its deep optimism. Greater than well, these are the prelude to the annexation of Hammer Industries. A few days ago, according to a large number of professional corporate annexation people, we conducted thorough exchanges and planned. It is found that as long as there is a problem with Justin Hammer, annexation is actually not difficult. After all, Justin himself is extremely obsessed with power, which leads to his absolute control. Moreover, the people under him have generally become answering worms, and the entire company has become a voice. Those who resisted or raised objections had long since been expelled by Justin. And his descendants are not great weapons. Occasionally, some outstanding ones are in other fields, but the business aspect is really not good. As long as I have an accident, the stock will fall if it falls, and the company will collapse if it collapses. But the crux of the problem is that Shining Star Group intends to annex, so other capitals will also have the same plan after they know about it. Therefore, how to grab the fattest piece of meat is the focus of everyone's discussion. But, the information about Justin's upcoming accident, only Lin knows, or only the people in the Shining Star Group know. Others were either unprepared, or simply didn't know. This, after repeated confirmation, they made a detailed plan. That is, deepen cooperation with Hanmo Industry and give a large number of orders. But it requires a short time to complete. Once it is not completed, it will take on huge debts. As long as Justin has an accident, the Shining Star Group can exert force to force the other party to convert the huge debt into equity. Otherwise go bankrupt. Moreover, this batch of orders is not a one-off. Rather, it is high volume, high frequency, targeted at various branches of Hammer Industries. Advertisement even if an order can be successfully completed, but under the pressure of other orders, absolutely, ACFI, cannot hold. In addition, Xingyao Group will also do things secretly. If the other party still wants to engage in production, it will be hell if they don't make a fool of themselves and take on huge debts. There are many similar schemes. In short, it is a trap to make Hammer Industries take on a large amount of debt in a short period of time. To put it more figuratively, it is, let it eat its mouth full of oil. At a critical moment, he pulled the rope and forced him to surrender. If he does not surrender, he will be hanged, and he will still eat dog meat. After surrendering, Xingyao had the final say in everything. Well, Lin is very pleased with that. Then, the person who will explain the company talks with the person from Hammer Industries about cooperation. And the most important task is to deal with those capital forces. Although he had pre-planned for Hammer Industries, trying to eat the fattest piece of meat. But other forces like the New York government, capital, military, etc., when they saw that the Shining Star Group had eaten such a large piece of fat for no reason, were absolutely jealous and wanted to grab it. Lin has to be responsible for finding more forces to fight the mines together. Otherwise, only relying on Xingyao Group itself, it is very likely that it will be besieged before it is digested. And his choice is A force like S.H.I.E.L.D., which originally had a partnership with the Shining Star Group, was not weak. Well, they all agreed when they heard Lin's plan. Then, waving a knife and fork, he entered the battle for the fat meat. Tut tut. This time, Xingyao Group will definitely have to endure. You know, Hammer Industries doesn't look like Stark Industries. But in fact, Justin Hammer's own ability is not weak, otherwise Hammer Industries will not become a tyrant in the military market. In addition, because Stark Industries has withdrawn from the military market on a large scale, Hammer Industries has now occupied a large market share and has become a giant in the entire military market. I ate but my stomach was full. This time, it's time to switch to Xingyao and S.H.I.E.L.D. They have a lot of food. As for Tony's side, a brief note is for Hammer Industries, but not much more. Advertisement after all, the source of Justin's problems was Tony. If there are a lot of changes on Tony's side and Justin doesn't go to jail, then the Shining Star Group will be in trouble. Be aware that these orders may be real money and have legal effect. It is only when Hammer Industries will undergo great changes that they dare to sign this way. If such a problem really arises, Lin can only shamelessly come to the door and solve Justin with words and methods. But if you really want to do this, the impact will be more serious. You know, Lin has extraordinary ability, which is no longer a top secret. At that time, everyone was in danger, and the collective siege of Lin was even more troublesome. So, for Tony's side, Lin doesn't even dare to push too hard now. For fear of affecting the development of things, FFT. Lin decided, having watched Tony make a fuss lately, he wouldn't get involved. Just waiting to finally pick up the fork and eat the fat. It really doesn't work, so I'll give Tony some points at the end so he can taste it too. Well, Pepper would definitely agree, after all, she's now CEO of Stark Industries. At this moment, Lin is playing games in his office. As the chairman of a large group, coupled with the world's top programming skills, I have already moved out the game of my previous life's fire. For example, the glory of the Emperor, the Jedi is alive. Now Lin can be said to be playing and picking up money. Everyone knows the terrifying speed at which games absorb money. It can be said that these popular games directly made Xingyao Group's mouth full of oil. It provides a large amount of capital guarantee for the company's unprofitable departments, branches and investments. While he was playing games with his mobile phone. Sudden perception to a wave of energy fluctuations. Lin's eyes narrowed, and she put down her phone and looked to the other side. He is very familiar with this energy fluctuation. Not surprisingly, the person who came should be the magician of Kamar Taj, Caecilius. Chapter 94, Heaven and Earth, for Flowers, Monthly Pass. For Caecilius, Lin's original attitude was more exclusive. He knew that the future Caecilius was likely to become a disciple of Dormammu. It was then plotted by the Ancient One magician to become Doctor Strange's sacrifice to the Sorcerer Supreme. Therefore, at first his attitude towards Caecilius was relatively general. 18. He has communicated with the magician of the entire Kamar Taj, and even spent money to send gifts to brush up his favorability. But I found that all magicians have a very general attitude towards him. Except for Caecilius. Maybe he knew Lin's strength and the Ancient One's value. So the attitude towards Lin can be considered friendly. For example, some basic meditation or spellcasting tips about their magician. Like Mordo Magician and Wong Magician, they refused to mention it. And Caecilius was willing to speak to Lin, so, the relationship between the two started to get better. And Lin's understanding of Caecilius, and he also knows that he will become a believer of Dormammu in the future, largely stems from the obsession of strength, resurrection and immortality. However, this is not a big problem for Lin. The Keel he has just mastered now is enough to prolong life. Even using the power of the Source to resurrect people is not a problem. As for the power, Lin, who has the ability to follow his words, said he is very confident. So, Lin held Caecilius with a solicitous attitude. Occasionally, he also indicated to him the power that he possessed about longevity and resurrection. FF. The relationship between the two is getting closer. From time to time Caecilius also revealed to Lin some of Kamar Taj's gossip and even some secrets. Even, he is now a key link in Lin's connection with Kamar Taj. In this regard, the Ancient One magician does nothing, allowing it to develop freely. Lin doesn't believe that bigwigs like Ancient One can't be unaware. In this case, from Lin's point of view, the Ancient One magician should have allowed himself to handle Caecilius's affairs, which is somewhat happy. In other words, Ancient One should have paid more attention to Caecilius. It's just that the other party is too obsessed and ultimately chooses a wrong path. When a better path naturally arises, it is more pleasant to see it succeed. Soon, in Lin's eyes, the energy fluctuations became stronger and stronger, and a circle of sparks appeared. It was Caecilius. Advertisement after Caecilius stepped out of the teleportation circle, he spoke to Lin, who was sitting in the chair. Lin, good morning. Sorcerer Supreme is looking for you. What? Lin whimpered lightly. What can the Ancient One magician find himself for? Nothing major recently. The world is quite peaceful. No, at this time, it seems that something is really going to happen. Lin pondered in his head as he stood up and spoke to Caecilius. Okay, got it. Wait a minute, I'll arrange the company affairs. Just meet Sorcerer Supreme with you. Afterwards, Lin Ren directly picked up the phone next to him and asked his assistant a few words. In the presence of Caecilius, the emphasis requires the company to proceed with its plan to annex Hammer Industries. And, be sure to be firm and precise, not too procrastinating. When Caecilius next to him heard it, a hint of surprise flashed across his face. Unexpectedly, Lin has such a plan. He has also heard about Hammer Industries, which is not weak, and Lin's forces even want to annex it. And he had already made a plan, and he seemed to have a plan, so Caecilius had to let Caecilius sigh inwardly. Lin didn't pay attention to the change in Caecilius's expression after finishing his instructions, and followed the teleportation channel directly into Kamar Taj. Afterwards, follow Caecilius to the Ancient One Magician. Soon, Lin came to the tea room where she came last time. Seeing Ancient One Magician drinking tea, he stretched out his hand to bow, and said respectfully, "Sorcerer Supreme, I have come." 35. Listen to Caecilius, you have something to do with me. 99. Excuse me, what's the matter? If I can do it, I will help it. After hearing this, Ancient One Magician smiled and said lightly, "No hurry, let's drink tea first." Then he glanced at Caecilius, who was withdrawing backwards, and said, "Caecilius, don't worry, you two sit down and have a cup of tea. The next thing has to do with you." 35 Advertisement. Caecilius immediately reached out his hand, answered humbly, and sat down next to Lin. 0. Ask for flowers. Very respectfully raised the teacup and slowly tasted the tea in the cup. Lin looked at it and compared her attitude, as if feeling the difference. "Well, I don't feel like I'm very professional, although I look very respectful, I feel a little sloppy." Then, sitting upright, learning from Caecilius, sipping the tea in the cup. Ancient One Magician looked at it, smiled, and said nothing. The three of them slowly sipped the tea in the cup. As if he was comprehending something, he generally didn't say a word. At first, Lin could hold back and slowly taste the taste of the tea in the cup. 18. Time passed slowly. Lin couldn't sit still, and looked at Caecilius, who had been sitting beside him. He couldn't help but sigh that his calming skills were not in place. Point 0 then. Asked tentatively to the Ancient One Magician. "Sorcerer Supreme, you asked me to come here, there must be something urgent." "I don't know, what can I help in that?" 39. Seeing this, Ancient One Magician showed a faint smile on his face, then refilled Lin En's cup with some tea, and then slowly said, "Lin, in ancient times, there were a large number of gods and supernatural forces on the earth. They are the rulers who rule the whole earth." 35. Later, Kamar Taj rose up and started a massive cleanup, driving away the gods. In other words, doing things that are heaven and earth. During this period, the gods who resisted, the weak were wiped out, and the powerful were completely expelled. At the same time, it has also established friendly cooperative relations with some powerful gods. That's how the earth is now peaceful. Hearing this, Lin nodded heavily, as if feeling quite emotional. Then, the Ancient One Magician continued. "Currently, we Kamar Taj have a friendly partnership with Odin, the God King of Asgard. 99. Generally speaking, we don't interfere with each other's development. When facing foreign enemies, we fight together, but, 35. There has been a recent dispute in Asgard over the heir to the throne. Therefore, the God King Odin entrusted Kamar Taj to take care of the safety of his sons. I think that." Chapter 95. The Power of the Source of Time. The next day, Mexico, outside the town, outside the crater. Caecilius looked at the very lively crater not far away. Especially staring at the hammer in the middle, and then asked Lin next to him. "This is the Thor artifact we're looking for?" 35. Hearing Caecilius's question, Lin nodded and said jokingly, "Yes, it is said to be called Mjolnir. It's Thor's weapon. How's it going? It's quite lively over there." 5. Would you like to try it? See if you can pull it up. It is said that if you pull it up, you can master Thor's power. Hearing this, Caecilius shook his head slightly and spoke slowly. Legends are just legends. No matter which artifact or magic weapon it is, it has the ability to recognize the master. Either the master of the magic weapon, or the strength is strong enough. 850. Otherwise, you can't use the other party's magic weapon at all. Otherwise, Lin, look over there, so many people are busy and haven't moved half a step. 35. It means that this artifact has its owner, and the owner is not dead. 99. Waiting for the master's return. Hearing this, Lin couldn't deny it and didn't say anything. But the heart kept complaining. There's nothing wrong with that, but unfortunately his father Odin is a tough character. Directly added a ban on the weapon, even the owner of the weapon cannot use it at present. Immediately afterwards, Caecilius asked Lin, "Sorcerer Supreme, we must protect the life of Thor's son, Thor." 35. The problem is that now only his weapon is found, no man. 99. What's the next step? You have a lot of experience in this area, you decide. Well, he still knows Lin's strength very well, and he is definitely much stronger than himself. Follow the advice of the strong. Most of the time, there is definitely nothing wrong. More importantly, Caecilius turned his head and glanced back. It was followed by 20 members of the Special Operations Team in black battlesuits. Can't help but complain. Lin has a large number of people, and the people who are called are not weak. What can he do? When Lin saw this, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and he waved to Caecilius and the members of the Special Forces team behind him, and said aloud. Advertisement, go to the nearest town first, the weapons are here, and the people must be nearby. Inquire from the town to see if there are any newcomers. Generally speaking, the circulation of people in these small towns is not very large, and new people appear, and it is easy to get relevant news. Saying that, take Caecilius into the car, and then let the driver drive to the nearest town. Well, for this mission, the Ancient One magician asked him to bring Caecilius to protect Thor's life. It was said that he could not disturb his training in the middle, just let him live. 12. Can't die on Earth. When Lin heard this, she groaned inwardly, which meant that it would be fine to die in Asgard. Originally, Lin felt that he could do or not to do this task. 1. One can only blame Ancient One magician's reward for being too tempting. As if to know what Lin needs most. Give a copy of the original Power of Time gem directly. Tut tut. Just let Lin play chicken blood. The fifth order speech method requires 3 high-quality source powers, and the required attributes are different. As far as Lin knows, it can meet his requirements. Only the Time Gem, Space Gem on Earth, and the Mind Gem brought by Loki in the future. The rest, Lin doesn't know. Now that you can get the Source Power of Time Gem, the remaining Space and the Source Power of Mind Gem are much easier to get started with. Wait for the New York War to start, seize the opportunity, and then you can upgrade rank 5 to speak the law. So, directly with Caecilius, and a group of Special Forces team members came to Mexico. That's where Mjolnir found it. Lin's motorcade drove into the town. Then send someone into the bar to inquire about the news. He and Caecilius found a hotel with a good environment. It was packaged directly, and the members of the Special Operations team were arranged to live in the back. Well, Caecilius knew after Lin had packed the whole hotel. Involuntarily, he muttered, "Damn tyrant." Then, I found a house next to Lin and settled in very comfortably. As time passed and soon, night came. Lin, at the moment, has received a message from a member of the Special Forces team. Going to talk to Caecilius tomorrow and watch Thor's current state 0. Advertisement boom, boom, boom. There was a knock on the door. Lin shouted out curiously, "Come in." The voice fell, and the door opened gradually. It's just Caecilius. Lin is a little puzzled. What does Caecilius have to do with him so late? So, curiously asked, "Caecilius, what's the matter? What's the matter?" 39. After Caecilius came in, he stood opposite the company, hesitant and a little hesitant to speak. This made Lin even more curious and asked directly, "Caecilius, what's the matter? If you can do it, you will definitely do it for you." 35. If you can't do it, I can help you think of a way. Don't be hesitant, it's not good for everyone. When Caecilius heard what Lin said, he gritted his teeth and said directly, "Lin, I want to ask something. I have an elder who I respect very much. But I found out that the power he used was the dark power. It's contrary to what I've been taught. I'm conflicted right now. I know that your strength is very strong, much stronger than me. So, I would like to ask, how do you view such a problem?" Hearing this, it made me realize that I immediately understood the meaning behind Caecilius 5.8. Isn't it just the Ancient One magician using the power of Dormammu? For Lin, such a thing is really not a problem, but for Caecilius, who has been educated and trained by magician, the use of dark power is extremely difficult to accept. Lin is not surprised by this. Just like Lin likes Oni-san and Tony likes models, it's not unacceptable to exchange them, but both of them will feel very uncomfortable. Well, there's nothing wrong with this analogy. However, in Lin's view, Caecilius was clearly on the cusp. So, took a look at Caecilius. Then, performing the words and sayings, under Caecilius's gaze, he said softly, "Dark." Chapter 96 rebuked Caecilius. Suddenly, under the gaze of Caecilius, he found that a deep dark force suddenly appeared in front of Lin. Immediately, the fighting instinct cultivated subconsciously made him stand up immediately. The whole body is full of energy, full of hostility to this dark power. Seeing this, Lin said softly again, "Bright." The voice fell, and in an instant, a warm, bright energy of white light appeared in front of Lin. Seeing this, Caecilius had a hint of doubt in his eyes. Immediately after, Caecilius saw Lin spit out a series of words. Flame. 35. Evil. Justice. 39. Despair. Lightning. Pain. Under the gaze of Caecilius, a large amount of energy of different colors appeared in front of Lin. There are gray evil powers, silvery white powers of justice full of courage, dark black despairing powers that carry the breath of despair, and thunder O2 electric powers. First there was a positive attribute energy, and then a negative attribute energy appeared. Repeated more than 10 times, until Lin's words stopped, the power of other attributes no longer appeared in front of Lin. Then, under Caecilius's suspicious and wary gaze, Lin spoke lightly. "I know who the respected elder you are talking about is. With my strength, I also perceive the same breath. But me, you were educated differently. In my opinion, power is good when used correctly, and evil when used evil. Attributes don't matter, what matters is what do you use it for. Protection or destruction? Do justice or preach evil? Advertisement. As far as I know a knight who uses demonic power, but every knight begins to punish the evil. Can you call him a villain? Also, I know that there is a reporter whose body contains an evil alien life form, and that alien life form wants to eat human brains every day. But under the communication with reporters, the two also began to embark on the road of justice. Although the alien life forms still clamor for eating human brains every day, in fact, he eats chocolate and chicken every day. You say he is evil? Hearing this, Cassilis seemed to perceive Lin's gaze on him. I found that my mouth could not open a little, and I didn't know how to continue. Then, I heard Lin continue. You magicians are educated and may be closely related to the environment you come into contact with. You face dimensional invasion every day, and the forces you come into contact with are extremely high-quality evil forces. Faced with the influence of those forces, the weak are easily affected by them, so you are as fearful as tigers. I totally understand. 5:35 Immediately afterwards, Lin's tone changed and he said questioningly. Some powerful magician, who study forbidden spells, in order to resist the invasion. Do you think he is good or evil? Facing Lin's questioning, Caecilius stood there blankly, wanting to open his mouth to tell, but he was hesitant. This. Before Caecilius could finish answering the question, Lin continued, in a more intense tone of questioning. A strong magician, willing to bear the erosion of the dark power alone, risking his life to shield the majority of weak magicians from the wind and rain. Do you think she is a good person or a bad person? Hearing this, Caecilius was stunned, and after a while, as if he had been thinking. Then he nodded heavily and said in a deep voice. I get it. 35, thanks, Mr. Lin, for the persuasion. Hearing this, Lin had a faint smile on his face, then walked in front of Caecilius, patted him on the shoulder, and said comfortingly. Actually, in my opinion, the magician conditions of your Kamar Taj are tough. Faced with enemies, they are all extremely evil and powerful. Latitude Mephisto. If you don't pay attention, you may be affected by it. Even me, the last time I strangled Dormammu believers, I was targeted by Dormammu. If Sorcerer Supreme hadn't helped me, I might still be affected by that dark force now. Advertisement. More importantly, because you cultivate your power, most of you use various ingenious methods to cast spells with the help of some justice camps. Latitude Mephisto. Therefore, your life expectancy is very average. It is far inferior to those evil gods and those who believe in evil gods. 35. Hearing this, Caecilius nodded with deep sympathy and then said very bitterly. Indeed, I've seen a lot of my comrades die, especially the powerful but older magicians. Looking at them, thinking about what they have done for the world, and comparing the longevity between the evil believers and our magicians. The psychological gap is huge. Hearing this, Lin quickly stepped forward and said. Actually, ever since I found out about Dimension Mephisto and Kamar Taj, I've been thinking about how to bridge the gap between the two. Kamar Taj is Earth's first line of defense against latitudinal invasions. If something goes wrong with Kamar Taj, the next person who will suffer will be extraordinary beings like us living on Earth. 850, due to lack of relevant experience, is prone to various problems, causing the entire Earth to be reduced to the domain of the Dimension Mephisto. I will do my best, while mobilizing other forces to secure Kamar Taj. 35. Your biggest concern is about longevity. I have a way to prolong life here, and even a technology that can be resurrected as long as you pay a lot of money. These all communicate with Kamar Taj. 9. Or, if you face large-scale cannon fodder, we can also mobilize military weapons and mercenaries to assist. In short, it is to ensure that the Dimensional Mephisto does not break through the first line of defense of the Earth, Kamar Taj. 99. Caecilius heard the various support methods that Lin kept talking about, especially the information about life extension and resurrection, and his eyes lit up until Lin finished speaking. Excitedly, he confirmed it again and again. Mr. Lin, are you sure? Is everything you say true? In response, Lin nodded heavily and said loudly. What I say will come true. At the moment, in a space unknown to Lin, the Ancient One magician saw this scene and nodded slightly. Chapter 97. Thor, trembling by electric shock, for flowers, monthly pass. The next day, town, hospital. Lin and Caecilius, who were standing outside the ward, looked at the very handsome man lying on the bed. Watching the three doctors constantly press and bind, shouting helplessly. I am Thor. I demand to see your king, then. A doctor next to him seemed to be unable to bear it, and directly picked up an electric shocker next to him. Lie down against the patient on the bed and press hard. Zzz. With the sound of the electric shock, the patient on the bed began to shake violently. Soon, he didn't say a word, his eyes were blank, and it was obvious that he had been electrocuted. At the moment, Caecilius looked at Lin, who was recording with his phone next to him, speechless. Some helpless, mixed with doubts asked. Lin, you are sure that the person who was stunned by the shocker is Thor? Instead of a psychopath? Lin listened to Caecilius's helpless tone, and said with a lot of smiles on his face. Yes, that's for sure. The blood in his body does contain the breath of thunder and lightning. It's just that it was blocked by a powerful force, so it looks no different from ordinary people. Then, his tone changed, and he said jokingly, Caecilius, do you want to take a picture and record it? Thor was numb with a small electric shock. This scene is absolutely worth tens of millions. Hearing this, Casillas also seemed to think of something, then laughed out loud, took out his mobile phone and started taking pictures. While taking pictures, Lin said with a smile, "Don't forget to wait a while and send me a copy of you." "Don't say it, this scene is too funny." 35, definitely a collection. 35. Well, after the conversation last night, the relationship between the two has obviously improved a lot. Caecilius, who was originally depressed, became visibly cheerful. Advertisement. Well, finding this change makes Lin feel great. This is his first villain to correct. Give him a sense of accomplishment. More importantly, Caecilius is not weak, masters a lot of spells, and has a very deep knowledge of Latitude Mephisto and Latitude Invasion. A strong man on the magic side. If you have some knowledge in the future, it is not convenient to find Sorcerer Supreme, so you can directly find Caecilius. His authority in Kamar Taj is very high, and most taboo books and taboo knowledge can be viewed. Well, Lin isn't stuck on a tiny earth, he's curious about those latitudes, Mephisto, and others. They are almost hitting Lin's house. Shouldn't Lin be allowed to come to their house, plunder, and Yangwei? If you don't do this, are you too sorry that you have crossed over this time? Relevant thoughts flashed by. Facing a small request from Caecilius, Lin smiled and agreed directly. He came to Mexico this time, and since he knew about Thor's various embarrassments, he naturally wouldn't miss it. This time he prepared 10 smartphones. The information is synchronized in real time. Even if one mobile phone is broken, the other mobile phone can still be used. Well, Thor's various embarrassments, he has to decide, he can use it as a joke or as a collection in the future. Tut tut. It really doesn't work, you can also extort money. Soon, under the watchful eyes of Lin and Caecilius, the doctor who had given Thor's injections, infusions and examinations had already left the ward. Then, looking at Jane, Professor Selvig and others who came in a hurry, Lin motioned for Caecilius to leave temporarily. Looking at Caecilius's suspicious gaze, Lin explained casually. The current Thor has not been beaten by society. The arrogance of the gods has not completely faded away. After a few days, after experiencing the beatings of the society, and discovering that I am just an ordinary person, I will communicate better at that time. 99. Caecilius, after thinking about it, found it to be reasonable, so he didn't say more, and continued to follow Lin to the outside. Then, watch as Lin instructs the driver to drive to Mjolnir's location. Although he was puzzled, he didn't say much. After all, Lin was a lot of people, he was alone, plus, he didn't know what to do now, so he went with it. Soon, the car had reached the vicinity of the crater created by Mjolnir. Caecilius looked at the crater and did not see the noisy scene last time. Instead, around the crater, a large number of ordinary people had begun to set up tents and buildings. A look of doubt flashed in his eyes. Advertisement. Lin didn't see the doubt in Caecilius's eyes and said directly. "Let's go, there is a force in front of us that has close cooperation with Xingyao. Let's go to fight the autumn wind. Later, I might want them to help." Saying that, Lin gave Caecilius a look, as if to imply something. Our plan, if they are involved, will go more smoothly. Well, Lin has decided that he will pull S.H.I.E.L.D. over to make a thunderstorm later. As the top official force of the Earth, the profession is very suitable, cannon fodder. No, there are still a lot of people, and there are several major alliances behind them. Tut tut. The thunder that can be carried will definitely not be less. By the way, give them a little distraction and find something to stop staring at him. Lin. He knew that now some people are starting to notice the Shining Star Group in Lin. There is no way, in only 1 or 2 years, to establish a large group with a market value of 300 billion, and it is currently annexing Hammer Industries. It has to be paid attention to. The entanglement of these people and these forces is also troublesome for Lin. The strength is not strong, but like sticky candy, no matter how you throw it, you can't get rid of it. It's also hidden deep, it's just disgusting. Qian Li's. Soon, Lin, with Caecilius and the security behind him, placed them in Mjolnir's camp directly towards S.H.I.E.L.D. Lin looked at the vigilant eyes of the guard at the gate of the camp and said with a smile. "Go to your chief Phil Coulson and say, the advisor to S.H.I.E.L.D. has arrived at Pine." Well, after repeated advice from Lin, Nick Fury finally managed to change his name. After the guard heard it, he vigilantly swept everyone in front of him, especially the members of the special operations team who were wearing black battlesuits and holding weapons behind them. Then he said cautiously, "Wait a minute, I'll go to the commander now." Immediately, go inside. Soon, the doorman came out with Phil Coulson behind him. Phil Coulson saw Lin standing not far away and shouted in mock surprise. "How are you, Mr. Lin?" 35. Well, he really didn't see who was coming through the surveillance video just now. Chapter 98. Pull the tiger skin. Pull the flag. Phil Coulson knew the moment Lin arrived, and immediately thought, something bad happened. The anomaly was so obvious that there was absolutely nothing good about Lin coming here. Maybe, get ready to snatch the spoils with S.H.I.E.L.D. After all, the things are there, and S.H.I.E.L.D. can't move them, can't hide them. With Lin's ability, he is not sure whether the other party has a way to store abnormal items. So, he immediately called his director Nick Fury to report the situation. After listening to it, the director told him that the Shining Star Group and S.H.I.E.L.D. have just begun to cooperate closely. Lin is now an advisor to S.H.I.E.L.D., so moderate permissions are open. At the same time, he also explained the bottom line to him and hung up. Well, he's busy with Tony and Hammer Industries right now, and doesn't want to be directly hostile to Lin right now. After all, Lin gave him a big piece of fat, although there were a few bones in it, but it was delicious after all. In any case, after digestion, consider the relationship between the two, and now we must maintain close cooperation. With the director's reply, Phil Coulson immediately made arrangements to meet Lin confidently. Then, Phil Coulson saw Lin not far away and shouted in surprise. "How are you, Mr. Lin? 853, are you visiting Mexico too? The scenery here is really good, the desert scenery, it is worth browsing. Do you need me to arrange a few guides here to show you the special scenery and special food here?" Lin looked at the large number of white buildings in front of him, and then watched Phil Coulson's face remain unchanged and nonsense, secretly complaining in his heart. Then he replied with a smile, "I have a friend who has dropped a hammer on you. He asked me to help him watch it for a while. Phil Coulson, get someone to come with me, the hammer is not far away. There are few people here, so you can help me guard it when the time comes." Caecilius, who was next to him, was speechless when he saw the conversation between the two. "Good guy," one directly said travel, the other directly asked the other party to help guard things. "I don't know, I thought they were helping each other." Afterwards, both of them cursed to themselves. Then, Phil Coulson spoke up. "Advertisement, Mr. Lin, S.H.I.E.L.D. has responsibility for managing anomalous affairs, as you, as a consultant to S.H.I.E.L.D., should be aware of that. This hammer is obviously an anomalous item, so S.H.I.E.L.D. will store it in accordance with the law. If his owner is found, we will communicate again to determine the ownership of the hammer. It will be returned to its original owner at that time. Well, there is nothing wrong with this, when people join S.H.I.E.L.D., the hammer will not still be S.H.I.E.L.D. As for not adding, sorry, who are you? Come on, this person violated state secrets and put me in jail." Lin heard this, facing Phil Coulson, a little serious. "Phil Coulson, I'm not kidding you, this hammer is a big deal. Once it's not dealt with, it can be said that a war affects two countries or two worlds." Then, he said in a serious tone, "You sure? Do you want to stop me? 99? Well, there's nothing wrong with that. The family is a prince, something happened on your side, and the weapon was robbed. According to normal logic, there must be a fight." Hearing this, Phil Coulson frowned. He knew that Lin was a man who was very fond of jokes and mischief. But the big things are still clear, seriously speaking, it may be true. Then, he gave Barton a look behind him and saw Barton's leaving figure. Then he made a gesture of invitation and replied sternly. "Consultant Lin, please elaborate on this point. After all, the war you speak of is in everyone's interest. 35. Well, this is a high level, a CFI, and a big hat is buttoned down." Lin was immediately speechless, but didn't say much. Go directly to the camp set up by S.H.I.E.L.D. Entering a conference room, Lin saw Barton hurriedly approaching, and immediately knew that this matter was done. Advertisement soon, Lin saw Barton say something before Phil Coulson. Then Phil Coulson brought a cup of coffee and spoke to Lin with a friendly smile. "Consultant Lin, after all, this matter involves the responsibility of S.H.I.E.L.D. 39. Could you please explain in detail? It's good for us to make judgments and prevent the worst from happening. It's also for the safety of the world. Well, as expected of the next S.H.I.E.L.D. director, this Mandarin is a set of sets." Lin took a look at the coffee and found that the quality was okay, it was the type she liked, and Phil Coulson did a good job. Then he took a small sip and said lightly, "This time, we came here because we were entrusted by others. As for who it is, I can't go into details. What I can tell you is that the other party is the big guy who really protects the Earth. Not like S.H.I.E.L.D., who just talks and doesn't do it." Speaking of at the moment, he paused, looked at the expressionless Phil Coulson, and continued. "Because of her existence, the Earth is protected from the invasion of Latitude Mephisto and a large number of evil supernatural forces. And this time, our target is a prince of the kingdom of God, that is, the future king of gods. He came to Earth to experience, and we were entrusted to protect his life. Don't put his life at risk, otherwise, once an accident occurs on Earth, it will be the trigger for the start of 2 world wars." Having said that, Lin looked at Phil Coulson lightly, as if to tell him how difficult this task was. "Well, there's nothing wrong with this statement, it's just pulling the tiger's skin, pulling the flag, exaggerating the danger, and it's a set of procedures." Really? After Phil Coulson heard it, with a serious face, he gave Lin Chin a cup of coffee, and then the questions were continuously asked like cannonballs. 0. Lin, your question is serious, but I want to ask more. What is the strength of the other country? Who is that prince? Compared with the Earth, who has the upper hand? 35. Before Phil Coulson could finish his question, Lin reached out and interrupted, took another sip of coffee, and said calmly. "The other country's name is Asgard. Chapter 99 Intimidate S.H.I.E.L.D. The name of the other side's country is Asgard, 99. Having said that, Lin glanced at Phil Coulson, then asked with a smile. "Doesn't this name sound familiar?" Sure enough, Phil Coulson's face showed a look of surprise, a little incredulous, and asked tentatively. "Lin, is the Asgard you're talking about the same, what I think?" Hearing this, Lin nodded heavily and continued, speaking. Yes, as you think. The other is a kingdom of gods. 35. The leading god King Odin has a splendid name in the entire universe. And the earth before that belonged to Asgard. It's called Midgard. Having said that, Lin looked at the stunned Phil Coulson with satisfaction, then took another sip of coffee and continued. Later, because of the rise of our Earth bosses, Midgard gained independence, but it still belongs to Asgard's territory in name. It's just that the god King Odin let the Earth develop. That's why we have the present Earth civilization. 99. Having said that, Lin pointed to Caecilius next to him and said to Phil Coulson. That big guy, we call it the Sorcerer Supreme. In the entire universe, in all surrounding latitudes, there is a great reputation. And he is a disciple of Sorcerer Supreme. The Sorcerer Supreme gives the mission. 39. This time he and I secretly guard Prince Asgard Thor. Now, do you understand the importance of this matter? Hearing this, Phil Coulson nodded subconsciously, and then asked suspiciously as if he had thought of something. Lin, I just heard what you said. Asgard should be very powerful. Thor, as a god, should not be weak. Why? For you to keep him safe? Hearing Phil Coulson's question, Lin applauded secretly in his heart, knowing that the time had come, and then said with a serious face. Phil Coulson, this time Thor came to Earth. It was his last experience before becoming a god king, so he was sealed with all power by god King Odin. He's just a normal guy now, so we need to guard it secretly. 99. Speaking of this, Lin's tone became more serious and said very solemnly to Phil Coulson. More importantly, advertisement, Asgard has 2 princes. Second Prince Loki is very keen on the throne and is well versed in intrigue. 35. And now the great Prince Thor has come to Earth, all powerless, to undergo the final trial of the throne. Having said that, Lin looked at Phil Coulson and gave a meaningful look. You said, what will happen? Hearing this, Phil Coulson's face was shocked and he said bitterly. You mean? Before Phil Coulson could finish speaking, Lin nodded directly. Yeah, just what you think. As long as something happens to Thor on Earth, no matter who it is, Earth will hardly be spared. Maybe, it will become a sacrifice before they become the king of gods. Hearing this, Phil Coulson asked urgently, now, do you know where Thor is? 99. I'm sending someone to protect him now. 99. Hearing this, Lin said to Kelson, shaking his head slightly. The god King Odin made Thor lose all his powers and came to Earth to be trained. You said, what if you send someone to protect you now? 99. So, you need to be like me, and you can protect it secretly. Don't get too involved in the fight between them. The only thing we have to do is not let Thor die on Earth. This is also the task assigned by the Sorcerer Supreme. Hearing this, Phil Coulson hesitated, then nodded. Okay, I understand what you mean. I can send someone to watch it secretly. Also, do I need to mobilize the power of S.H.I.E.L.D.? 35. Dealing with the impending crisis. 39. Hearing this, Lin's eyes lit up, secretly said yes, and said directly. I advise you to be highly prepared, arranged like any tank missile. It is recommended that a nuclear bomb be arranged as well. 95. Speaking of which, Lin's tone was somewhat meaningful. Advertisement, you know, this time you are facing a god. The strength of the opponent's dispatch will definitely not be weak. It just so happens that you S.H.I.E.L.D. specialize in this field, so you can also prepare to test the power of Asgard. 39. Hearing this, Phil Coulson's eyes lit up, then nodded directly to Lin, and quickly replied. 0. Ask for flowers. Okay Lin, I see what you mean. I will contact the director immediately and ask for support. Well, Phil Coulson knew exactly what Lin was implying. On the one hand, there is a real test of the gap between Asgard and the power of the United States. On the other hand, this is to put some pressure on the World Security Council and the 5 rogue states behind it. After all, in the face of a strong enemy, it is possible to further increase support for S.H.I.E.L.D. At that time, the emergence of Asgard will bring new development opportunities for S.H.I.E.L.D. Therefore, the bigger the scene, the better, and the more it can highlight the sense of crisis, the better. It's better to let the big shots in the chairs see how serious the danger is, and they will not go out of their way to support S.H.I.E.L.D. Well, this trick was used by S.H.I.E.L.D. before, when the Kree attacked Earth. Although later stopped by Captain Marvel. But through the influence of the alien invasion shaped by that war, the World Security Council has strongly supported the development of S.H.I.E.L.D. Otherwise Nick Fury wouldn't have the money to build an air carrier and so many private bases. Phil Coulson has experienced all of this himself, and he understands the inner truth. Seeing this, Lin also smiled faintly and nodded slightly. Then leave a contact for Phil Coulson and leave with Caecilius. After leaving the base built by S.H.I.E.L.D., Lin looked at Caecilius's puzzled eyes and said lightly. S.H.I.E.L.D., this organization, I know very well. 99. If you don't tell him the danger, it's easy to cause trouble. Moreover, they have a large number of technological weapons in their hands, which will be of great help to our future development. Well, as for why Lin knew Asgard so well, Lin didn't say it, and Caecilius couldn't ask. One can only guess that Lin had a source of intelligence of his own, otherwise he would never have known about Kamar Taj before. Immediately, without thinking much, Caecilius followed Lin towards the town. After all, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with what Lin just said, except for the feeling of being a little intimidating. Everything else is correct. Well, both are correct, just another way of saying it. Even if Phil Coulson interviews Thor later, he will only become more and more convinced of everything Lin says. Lin believes that the prepared shield will not let him down. Chapter 100 Thor who has been beaten by society. 3 days later, Mexico, Shield Camp. Phil Coulson looked at the monitor in front of him, and asked Lin and Caecilius next to him with some doubts. Lin, why is the monitor showing this Thor talking to himself? He seemed to be communicating with someone. Sitting in a chair, Lin, who was drinking tea, saw this, and said 2 words lightly to the monitor. Show. In an instant, a faint light appeared on the monitor. Immediately afterwards, the monitor screen began to change. A handsome man in a black suit appeared and kept communicating with Thor. Lin saw the surprised eyes of Phil Coulson and Caecilius and said lightly. He is Loki, the second prince of Asgard. He followed his mother, Queen Frigga of Asgard, to practice Asgard 870 guard magic. Although not as strong as Thor, it is not weak. 35. Ordinary shield agent, you can't even see where he is, let alone catch him. With that said, Lin also glanced at Phil Coulson. He didn't forget that Phil Coulson died at the hands of Loki because he didn't see Loki's tracks clearly during the battle in New York. Hearing this, Phil Coulson stared at the image displayed on the screen with vigilant eyes. It was as if he was going to be deeply etched in his mind. Then, through the monitor, the 3 watched Loki talk to Thor. Thor roared in despair, and Loki tried to pull Mjolnir, but couldn't pull it off anyway. Phil Coulson saw Loki leave, and immediately rushed to the room where Thor was being held. He was deeply curious about Thor's desperate roar just now. What would make a god like this? Lin followed closely. Soon, Phil Coulson saw Thor and asked with some doubts. Hello, Mr. Thor. 35. What happened just now? Why did I hear you yelling? Any questions? Thor glanced at Phil Coulson, didn't speak, just kept silent. Father is dead. Father is dead. Advertisement, because of my fault. Hearing this, Phil Coulson froze, then glanced at Lin behind him. Looking at Lin and giving him a look, he immediately understood, and began to walk out of the room slowly, allowing Thor to blame himself. Phil Coulson is not stupid, according to Lin's introduction to Loki earlier. Apparently, this was a plot by Loki to pursue Asgard's throne. Once again confirmed what Lin said before, I am afraid most of it is true. Well, it is the instinct of an agent to not easily believe what anyone says. After returning to the monitoring room, Phil Coulson asked Lin hesitantly. Lin, as you said earlier, there will definitely be a big fight here in the future. Would you like me to prepare to evacuate the crowd? Prevent it from spreading to the masses? Well, Phil Coulson is quite human in S.H.I.E.L.D. If it were Nick Fury, who cares about the crowd, he can still cover his eyes if he stays here. Lin nodded at this. It doesn't matter to him, anyway, in the end S.H.I.E.L.D. and Loki will do the right thing and wait for him to lead the situation. At that time, S.H.I.E.L.D. will not be able to escape if he wants to. At that time, if he throws some good points, he will not be able to get on his big ship. Seeing this, Phil Coulson immediately arranged for the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent to prepare for the evacuation of the crowd. At the moment, Jane, Professor Selvig, and his assistant Daisy Lewis came to the S.H.I.E.L.D. camp to pick up Thor. Phil Coulson thought for a moment, briefly asked Lin's opinion, and got a positive answer. Let Professor Selvig take Thor away immediately. Looking at Jane's leaving figure, Lin said lightly to Phil Coulson, as if pointing at something. Thor seems to have a crush on this Jane Foster. I suggest you S.H.I.E.L.D. to take good care of Miss Foster. Hearing this, Phil Coulson's eyes lit up, then nodded heavily to his face, and said with a hint of understanding. Okay, I see what you mean. Well, isn't it just through Jane's influence on Thor? This trick, S.H.I.E.L.D. is an expert. They act as agents, which must be learned. Maybe, the friendly relationship between the two worlds will start from now on. 3 days later, in a small town in Mexico, Professor Selvig rented a hut. Advertisement Jane Foster was eating face to face with Thor, the affection they exuded. Let Professor Holvig and his best friend Daisy look at each other helplessly. Keep your head down and continue cooking. Well, dry rice people, dry rice souls, and dry rice are all good people. Suddenly, bang, 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 there was a knock on the door. Daisy looked at Jane and Thor who were indifferent, and then looked at the eyes of Professor Holvig opposite. Helplessly stood up and trod over to open the door. After opening the door, I suddenly saw a handsome young man in a blue suit standing at the door, followed by an equally handsome uncle. Suddenly stunned, I couldn't help sighing inwardly, so handsome. Then, he looked at the two of them with maddened eyes. It was Lin and Caecilius. At the moment, Lin looked helplessly at the nympho Daisy Lewis in front of her. Thinking of her personal information, real name identification, she is definitely a single dog. Immediately, standing in front of Daisy, he shook his hand and said lightly. Please let me know, I'm looking for Mr. Thor Odinson. After hearing the question from the handsome guy in front of her, Daisy came back to her senses and invited the two handsome guys into the house very attentively. Then some panicked and loud roar shouted, Short 5.8, Thor, someone's coming for you. Lynn's eyes twitched slightly when she heard Daisy's huge amounts of voice. Immediately decided not to pay attention to this person. At the moment, eating face to face with Jane, Thor hears Daisy's roar shout. He raised his head subconsciously, looked at the two people not far away with some doubts, stood up, walked to Lynn, and asked curiously. Hello, I'm Thor. What's the matter? 39 Hearing Thor's apparently mild tone, Lynn couldn't help but nodded slightly. Sure enough, Thor, who has experienced social beatings, can speak human words. Immediately, the tone was light. Entrusted by the great Sorcerer Supreme, I will be in charge of all arrangements on Earth, Lord Thor, Odinson. Chapter 101 Soul Astral, Classic Scene, Sorcerer Supreme? Thor muttered a sentence, then asked curiously. Who is she? How come I never seem to have heard of Midgard's magician? 5. Lynn heard Thor's question and replied lightly. Sorcerer Supreme, that's a figure comparable to your father Odin. If you don't know, it may be that your father and mother did not want you to know that Asgard was expelled from Midgard by the Sorcerer Supreme. Hearing this, Thor's eyes flashed with anger. Asgard was banished, and he dared to make such a joke. So he strode forward and waved his fist. Seeing this, Lynn stepped forward, slapped Thor's chest, and said softly. Soul Astral. In an instant, Thor felt his soul knocked out of his body in an instant. Looking from not far away, through the soul, looking at his own body, waving continuously, shouting to Lynn and Caecilius. What happened? Oh two. What's wrong? Thor was motionless in the eyes of Jane, Holvig, and Daisy. Jane was about to surround herself and protect Thor, while Holvig began to call the police. Seeing this, Lynn heard Thor's roar shout, nodded slightly, and spit out two words lightly. Soul appearance. 9 The moment the voice fell, everyone could see it with the naked eye. Not far from Thor's body, a soul shining with pale golden light flashed. Jane, Holvig, and Daisy stopped in an instant, and Roar was shocked. Then the shout of Thor's soul was heard. Magician, bring my soul back to my body. Otherwise Asgard will not spare you. Hearing this, Lynn said indifferently. Thor, you think Asgard is everything, but the Asgard you're in is only part of this universe. And this universe is just one of an infinite universe. The world is infinite, some are beautiful and vibrant, some are evil and full of killing. Some are in those dark corners, where the power of the wild is greedily waiting for an opportunity. Asgard is also in danger of destruction if faced with a massive dimensional Mephisto invasion. So, don't underestimate the Sorcerer Supreme who still protects Earth from the Mephisto invasion of many dimensions. Advertisement, don't underestimate Earth's civilization. After he finished speaking, looking at Thor who was speechless, and the other people who were stunned, his heart was filled with joy. This picture, he can rehearse in his heart for a long time. Especially imitating the classic scenes of Sorcerer Supreme, it is quite compelling. Then, expressionlessly, he waved at Thor, thinking in his heart, and his soul returned. Moment. Under the gaze of all, Thor's soul returned to the body. Immediately afterwards, the body swayed and fell forward. As a result, Lynn in front of him held it steady with one hand. In response, Thor showed a complicated expression, and was silent for a while, his voice a little low. Sorry, I was a little excited just now. When Lynn heard it, a smile formed on the corner of her mouth. Well, as expected of Thor, who has been beaten by society, his temper is much gentler. Then he took out a portfolio and said lightly, I found out the other day that you seem to be locked up by S.H.I.E.L.D. Although someone wants to fake an identity and save you. Having said that, Lynn glanced at Professor Holvig lightly, looked at his embarrassment, and continued. But, on my side, the people from S.H.I.E.L.D. let you out. At the same time, you have handled the relevant documents for you, 99. I believe that a secure identity can make your experience on Earth more stable. I hope you can fulfill the expectations of the God King Odin. On my side, I can also complete the task entrusted by the Sorcerer Supreme to bring you back to Asgard safely. With that said, Lynn handed Thor the portfolio in his hand. After Thor heard the last sentence of returning to Asgard, he began to be silent, with a look of guilt, and said in a low voice. I'm afraid I won't be able to return, Asgard. Hearing this, Lynn asked in amazement, her voice raised slightly so that everyone could hear it. What? You say it again. 35. What does it mean to be unable to return to Asgard again? Aren't you the eldest son of the God King Odin? Isn't this an experience? I still have the task that Sorcerer Supreme gave me. What happened? You tell me clearly. Advertisement. Thor heard Lynn's slightly anxious tone, as if thinking of something. His tone was very low and explained. I'm very sorry, your mission may not be completed. I was completely exiled by Asgard. My father Odin has also passed away. Hearing this, Lynn directly interrupted Thor's next words, and her tone was full of doubt, surprise, and disbelief. Well, the acting is so similar that Lynn believes it herself. Wait, you said your father Odin died. I don't know where you got this message from. 39. Absolutely false. If your father Odin dies, Sorcerer Supreme can definitely get the message and let me know right away. After all, Sorcerer Supreme is okay with your father. 35. Otherwise the Sorcerer Supreme will not make me responsible for the safety of your life on Earth. 870. Hearing this, Thor's face also began to flash a puzzled expression, and he said incredulously. No, that's what my brother Loki told me. Hearing this, Lin said something serious to Thor directly. Thor, your brother's Loki. I remember the priesthood as the god of lies and mischief. I don't know how to be a person, but what do you think of his ministry? You are now an experience. It stands to reason that no one should touch you. I'm just going to send you a certificate and then I'll leave. Your brother Loki, the priesthood is a lie and a prank. It is indeed Marvel's well-known younger brother. He needs to clarify things a little more, just for the throne, and then deceive you. Hearing this, Lin saw Thor's expression change slightly, recalling what Loki had done before, as if he understood the meaning of Lin's mouth, and muttered to himself. You can be absolutely sure that what he told you is true. However, none of this affects what he does next, instead of deceiving you in order to achieve a certain purpose. With his extraordinary ears, Lin could hear Thor muttering helplessly. No. Chapter 102 Intimidate Thor, Nervous Jane. Regardless of Thor's change in expression, Lin clapped her hands and gave a crisp applause. Looking at Holvig, Jane, and Daisy who focused their attention on him, they said lightly. Now that things have changed, there may be a problem with my mission. So, let me tell you something. I have bought the house you rented, 99. You can live forever. No more rent to pay, 35. I will live with you for the next month, 35. Having said that, Lin glanced at Thor lightly and continued. To prevent a diplomatic accident involving two civilizations, 35. I had to do it myself to keep his life safe, 99. Well, quite the demeanor of a domineering president. Hearing this, Thor's face also showed embarrassment, as if he understood what Lin meant, but he didn't know what to say. Jane seemed to understand what Lin was implying, and said nervously and curiously. Not really, Mr. Magician. Lin glanced at Jane and said with a smile. Based on what he just said, I think he is in danger now. Miss Foster, do you think the struggle for the throne has not been cruel since ancient times? This involves an opportunity to take control of civilization, years. Looking at Jane nodded lightly and then continued. I have something to do here, stay for a month, 35. If there are no surprises, in a month, I will leave, 35. When the time comes, I will leave a contact information. If there are any more problems, just make a call directly. After saying that, Lin clapped his hands, and under the gaze of the three, he took Caecilius and went upstairs directly, found 2 vacant rooms, and shouted to them. I will live here for the next month. Call me if you have something. On Earth, I can basically handle most things. Then, as if implying something, he continued. Including S.H.I.E.L.D., hearing this, Jane, Holvig, and Daisy looked at each other as if thinking of something. A surprise flashed across his face. After seeing the room, Lin looked at Caecilius with a surprised expression on his face, but he didn't want to say anything. Said with a smile. Thor is a very proud deity. Advertisement, even if you have experienced social beings before, you are mild-mannered. But, if I don't give him some shock, I'm afraid he won't listen to every word I say. Now, trust Thor that they won't be ostracized by us. Even, some of our requests will be complied with. After all. Speaking of this, Lin's tone was somewhat meaningful. We are here to help them. 35. Hearing this, Caecilius nodded and muttered to himself. He figured he knew what kind of person Lin was, a whole showman. If I hadn't told him in advance, I'm afraid he'd be exposed. To be honest, Caecilius is a little curious, what kind of environment can cultivate such a person? Smart, planning, intimidating, dramatic, serious nonsense. These are the labels he puts on him these days, but such a person can easily carry out a difficult thing. And, get everyone's approval, coupled with his great strength. He had to be impressed. Night, hall, dinner party. At the dinner table, a sumptuous dinner appears. Nominally, to celebrate the addition of Lin and Caecilius. A total of 6 people, Lin sat with Caecilius, Thor sat with Jane, and then Professor Holwick sat with Daisy face to face. First of all, Professor Holwick raised his glass and said aloud. Welcome Mr. Lin and Mr. Caecilius to join us. To be honest, he didn't know who Lin was at first, but his face was a little familiar. As a result, when Lin reported his name, he immediately understood that it was Lin Duncan, chairman of Shining Star Group. So, for what Lin said earlier, he can solve most things on Earth. Immediately convinced. In the capitalist world of the United States, the top capital is to have the right to speak. Then Pidian began to flatter, preparing for the follow-up fundraising. Jane and Daisy were surprised to know Lin's identity as well. Especially Daisy, the nympho's expression came out again. If Lin sees it, he definitely has a black line on his face, this is not his thing. Advertisement. Hearing that Professor Holvig showed a good intention, Lin raised his glass and said with a smile. Thank you all for the welcome, I've finished this drink. After speaking, he sighed, poured another glass of wine, raised his glass to Thor, and said very boldly. Rest assured, Thor, 99, as long as you're on Earth. Definitely keep you safe. Well, there is nothing wrong with this, there is a danger, the god King Odin is staring at it, and there will never be any problems. Thor heard what Lin said and raised his glass too, with a slightly bitter smile. Then suffocate. Lin understood what Lin was implying inside and out, and he was very confused now. I simply gave up and started drinking heavily, a drunk to relieve 1,000 sorrows. Then, Thor and Lin started blowing against each other. Cup after cup of wine is wiped out by Lin and Thor. The four Kisilius and Holvig next to him were a little stunned. With constantly drinking and constantly chatting, the whole atmosphere began to get lively. The relationship between the 6 people is very harmonious. Well, so, eating and drinking is an important way to engage in relationships. After a while, Professor Holwig, who had just been toasted by Lin, asked curiously. Lin, can this Mr. Kisilius introduce you in detail? Just heard his name before. Lin heard Professor Holwig's question, smiled and said loudly. Kisilius, apprentice of the Sorcerer Supreme. Among Ka, Qian Zhao's Mataj, his strength can also be said to be one of the best. This time, the Sorcerer Supreme says that we both work together to protect Thor from putting his life in danger on Earth. So, don't worry if there is any problem and you can't find me, the same goes for contacting him. He is proficient in a large number of profound spells and is very powerful. Kisilius heard Lin's obvious self-praise, very humble, and kept saying that it was okay. As soon as Thor heard that Kisilius was a powerful magician, he immediately went straight to the ground. He was very friendly to powerful people. So began to toast Kisilius frequently. Lin saw this with a faint smile on her face. He could be ready to pull Kisilius to his side, and even eventually to Avengers. In this way, influence Kamar Taj to promote his plan. Well, it's not impossible to make Kisilius the next Sorcerer Supreme. Chapter 103 The Destroyer Strikes. The next day, morning, Mexican hut. Lin brought Kisilius and Thor at the table with a group of people, eating the breakfast they had just bought. Talk to Thor about the customs of Asgard while you eat. Sudden. Bang. 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 There was a knock on the door. Everyone looked at each other, and Chi-Chi focused their attention on Daisy. Daisy stood up helplessly, dropped the breakfast in her hand, and went to open the door. No way, she has the highest status among the 6 people. She doesn't open the door, who will open the door? After opening the door, I saw a very familiar man in a suit with a computer and documents in his hand. Immediately exclaimed in surprise. Jane, come on, the person who stole our documents last time is here again. Lin heard that and turned to look. Oh, it turned out to be Phil Coulson. It seems that what I explained last night has been done. Then he smiled at Holvig and Jane and said, this time, here comes the person who returned your documents. Well, we had a good chat last night, and Jane made a small request, asking S.H.I.E.L.D. to return their documents. As soon as Lin heard it, it was a small matter and agreed. That night, I made a phone call with Phil Coulson and made the request. This morning, Phil Coulson himself came. It seems that he also wants to have a relationship. Lin thought for a second, then stood up, beckoned to Phil Coulson and said 873. Phil Coulson, since you're here, come in and give them the papers. Phil Coulson heard the words, showed a friendly smile at Daisy, and walked towards Lin with the computer and documents. After walking to the dining table, he smiled at Thor, and then said apologetically to Jane next to him. Sorry, Miss Foster. Your documents have been carefully checked by us. Found little information that leaked material intelligence, 55. So, return your belongings specially. Saying that, he handed the computer and documents in his hand to Jane. After Jane heard it, she put away the computer and files with a smile, and said gratefully to Lin. Trouble you, Lin. 35. Lin looked at Phil Coulson, who had no embarrassed expression beside him, and nodded slightly. Well, it seems, Jane's resentment that Phil Coulson stole his documents is still lingering. Immediately afterwards, Phil Coulson whispered to Thor. Mr. Thor, Odinson, we have generally learned about your situation through consultant Lin. If you have anything on Earth, you are welcome to call us. Advertisement saying that, he handed a business card in front of Thor, and after Thor caught it, he continued. Most of the problems on Earth, we can solve. If, ACFI, there are questions, we can also contact our consultant, Mr. Lin. Well, Lin glanced at Phil Coulson, expressionless. Pull the tiger's skin, pull him, but there's no way, it's the truth. He could only helplessly wave his hand and signal to leave. Phil Coulson saw this, smiled, and walked away slowly. Lin looked at Phil Coulson's back, and said lightly in the face of everyone's doubts. S.H.I.E.L.D. has a close cooperation with our Shining Star Group. So, I put up a consultant position on their side as well. Then he smiled at Thor. Go to them if you have some errands. There are many of them. In your capacity, they will do their best. Then, sat down and continued to eat breakfast. Seeing this, everyone continued to start the process of cooking. After all, it's a little late in the morning and the stomach is a little empty. 3 days later, Lin looked at Thor and Jane out for a walk, and shook his head helplessly. For the past 3 days, he was basically playing with his mobile phone. Just waiting for the arrival of Asgard, the Loki controller destroyer Battle Gear strikes. Result. After waiting for 3 days, he still did not appear, which made him a little helpless. Suddenly, Lin suddenly felt huge amounts of energy fluctuations appearing on the west side of the town, and Caecilius next to him seemed to perceive it and stared in the same direction. Lin knew immediately that the battle was about to begin. So I immediately called Phil Coulson, and after the call was connected, he said quickly. Phil Coulson, let the military get ready. I'm afraid there will be a big war soon. 39. After hearing the news on the phone, he replied quickly. Okay, Lin already knows. 35. I'm here to ask the military people to prepare. Well, Lin asked S.H.I.E.L.D. to come to fight the mine, and the Aegis level was not to be outdone, so he went directly to the military to fight the mine. As soon as the military heard it, it was suspected that it was an alien invasion, and immediately pulled a large number of weapons to test its power and combat power. Lin and S.H.I.E.L.D. watched the results. The problem is solved, everyone rejoices, and declares its own strength. If the problem cannot be solved, it is as if the top management wants funds and seeks development. The same goes for the military's logic. For Lin, as long as the military and S.H.I.E.L.D. join the war. Advertisement, then he would be sure to guide them further into the war and arouse their nerves. When the time came, Lin pushed them further into his own plans. Can't get out of his palm. After a while, Lin heard loud noises outside. The words related to evacuation were vaguely heard. It was known that S.H.I.E.L.D. and the military began to exert their efforts to evacuate the residents of the town to prepare for the subsequent war. After a while, the sound began to gradually weaken. Then, the door opened, and people watched Thor and Jane followed by 4 Asgard men who were wearing armor and exuding a strong breath. Lin squinted as if watching, as if thinking. Thor saw Lin and Caecilius not far away. He greeted Roar directly to the two of them, and at the same time introduced to the people behind him. His tone was a little excited. Lin, Caecilius. This is a friend I met on Earth, 99. Pause for a moment, as if thinking of something, then speak out loud. Both of them are not weak, you can be considered strong. Then he pointed to the two of Lin and introduced them to the 4 behind him. Vorstage, Fandral, Hogun, my comrade in arms, the 3 warriors of Asgard. Also, this is Sif, my comrade in arms, the goddess of land and harvest. Lin looked at the 4 people behind Thor, and said slightly politely to Roar. Welcome to Earth. Ask me if you have any doubts about the Earth. Fandral and Sif also called Roar, but their attitudes were relatively general. Lin Hao was not surprised by this. For the thinking of the Asgard people, he still knows very well. Powerful, ignoring the weak. Therefore, you will not have a good attitude until you show your strength. If it weren't for Thor, 80% of them would be indifferent. But, in a fight, you will know who is strong and who is weak, and your attitude will be clear at that time. Lin thought to himself. Then, boom, right at the moment. Boom. Boom. Everyone present can clearly feel that there is a strong aura that is rushing here. Destroyer. Bang. 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 The sound of gunshots and cannons intertwined. Lin narrowed his eyes and instantly knew the enemy. A loud voice came from all around. Chapter 104 Nuclear Bomb War Destroyer. Feel the moment when the huge breath appears. Thor, Sif and other Asgard people all turned their heads to look in the same direction. A cautious look appeared on his face. Seeing this, Lin spoke to Thor in a solemn tone. The worst has happened. Now, we need to prepare. 99. Looking at Thor's bitter smile, he said softly, Space Shuttle. In an instant, a circular space transmission channel with sparks appeared in front of everyone. Through the passage, everyone clearly saw that the S.H.I.E.L.D. people were constantly reporting the situation and giving orders. Then Lin looked at Fandral, Vorstada and the others had serious expressions on their faces, nodded slightly, and said faintly. Go in. Let's see who the enemy really is. Having said that, Lin brought Caecilius directly in. Thor and the others looked at each other and entered in turn with Jane and the others. After entering the monitoring room through the teleportation channel, looking at the surprised expression on Phil Coulson's face, he said a little seriously. Phil Coulson, talk about the enemy. Asgard Thor's friends have arrived and can help too. Hearing what Lin Ren said, Phil Coulson glanced at the 4 people in armor behind Lin, with a friendly smile on his face, pointed to the monitor screen, and said to everyone. Our enemy is a being in armor. In addition to physical attacks, his attacks are known to release lasers through his eyes. At the same time, the defense is extremely strong. We have released a large number of tactical grenades on our side, but found that the opponent was basically unscathed. And also, before Phil Coulson could finish, Thor interjected. That's my father's destroyer armor. Forged by the King of Dwarf, it is very powerful. But, 35, I looked as if no one was in the armor, just remotely controlled, 99. It will be much weaker, but it's still very difficult with these forces on Earth alone. 39. Hearing this, Phil Coulson's eyes lit up obviously, and he quickly asked Thor. Mr. Thor, can you introduce in detail this destroyer armor? 39. Hearing Phil Coulson's question, Thor spoke with great humor. No problem. My father used to wear this destroyer armor, which shook the 9 realms and killed countless powerful enemies. Advertisement, end. 35 Lin kept her eyes on the screen as Thor continued to talk about the destroyer armor. In his previous life he had only seen Thor defeat the ruined Warframe. As for how much damage can be done by the power of the Earth Heat weapon, he still does not know. It's a great opportunity to test out how much power the United States can unleash, and it's a good guide for his future. Lin saw on the monitor screen that a large number of soldiers in military uniforms kept raising their submachine guns to shoot. At the same time, he kept taking off the tactical bomb on his waist and bombarded it forward. But in the end, the destroyer only took a slight step back and the hull was unscathed. Before long, the sound from the monitoring room began to be heard. Attention all combatants, attentive, prepare to evacuate. After 30 seconds, tactical missiles will be released. Attention, prepare to evacuate. After 30 seconds, tactical missiles will be released. Phil Coulson also heard this message, and his face became extremely cautious. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the screen, looking forward to the roll of this tactical missile. 30 seconds later. Boom! Even in the monitoring room, you can hear huge amounts of sounds. From the monitoring screen, a dazzling light was released in the destroyer armor, and then a large amount of yellow sand covered the site. Soon, the yellow sand began to fall, revealing an armored figure inside. Phil Coulson was stunned to see. The chest, arms, and thighs of the destroyer armor are damaged to some extent. But soon, the surrounding metal began to twist, repair damaged areas quickly. In the end, in the eyes of Phil Coulson, the destroyer was quickly restored to integrity. Immediately afterwards, through the monitoring of the military communication channel, a large number of voices came. Impossible. How so? Is this a monster? There was a lot of disbelief, and Lin saw a bitter look on Phil Coulson's face. Immediately afterwards, a serious voice came from the military communication channel. Warfighters, pay attention to Void, pay attention to Void, 35. After 10 seconds, surface-to-surface missiles, anti-tank missiles and small tactical nuclear bombs will be released in succession. Well, when I heard the serious voice of the other party, I knew that the other party was starting to get nervous, and even prepared a nuclear bomb. Advertisement soon. 0. Ask for flowers. Under the watchful eye of Lin et al. A ground-to-ground missile hit the destroyer armor. The destroyer armor seemed to notice it, turned his head, aimed at the missile, and a laser hit it directly, melting it. The missile exploded directly in the air, and everyone saw a dazzling light flashing in the air, but it did not damage it. Immediately afterwards, several missiles began firing simultaneously, including nuclear bombs. The destruction armor only had enough time to destroy 2 ground-to-surface missiles, and the remaining anti-tank missiles and small tactical nuclear bombs hit the destroyer smoothly. Boom! Boom! Through the monitoring screen, everyone saw the moment when the missiles and nuclear bombs hit, as the mushroom cloud rose, covering the destroyer. Lin could clearly see the cautious expressions on Asgard's faces behind Vorstager, Fandral, Hogan, etc. As if to feel the power of this blow. But, as the mushroom cloud gradually dissipated, everyone could see it clearly through the monitoring screen. The Warframe of Destruction began to shatter in large areas, but still maintained its integrity. Soon, with the strange runes flashing on the surface of the armor, the surrounding flames, radiation and many other energies began to be absorbed by the armor. Then start a slow repair. The longer the repair time, the faster the repair speed. Lin saw Phil Coulson's face turn ugly and pale in an instant. It seems that it was completely unexpected that under the nuclear bomb, the opponent was not completely eliminated, and there was even a possibility of rapid recovery. Then there were a lot of incredible, even fearful voices through the military's communication channels. Lin knew that, this time, it was their turn. Then, Lin spoke to Phil Coulson indifferently. Phil Coulson, it seems now. Current weapons cannot destroy the destroyer, 99. FFT. Now we need to try it out. Lin saw this and stepped directly into it. Phil Coulson heard this, with a bitter expression on his face, and nodded slightly. You contact the military and ask them to cooperate. Immediately afterwards, 2 words faintly spit out from his mouth. It can be clearly seen through the screen that not far away is the battlefield, where the destroyer armor is staying. If you want to participate in this war, just follow. Seeing this, Lin said lightly to Caecilius and Asgard. In an instant, a transmission channel with sparks appeared in front of everyone. Teleport. 35 Chapter 105 Warform, 8 Golden Locks. After Lin stepped out of the teleportation channel, the 3 warriors Thor, Sif, and Asgard behind them also stepped into the edge of the battlefield. Lin looked around for a week with a faint smile on her face. After this war, he will make a lasting impression in Asgard and the United States. Lay the groundwork for future plans. With this in mind, Lin thought to himself. Flight. The mind turned, and under the gaze of everyone, it instantly rose into the air. Looking at the destroyer not far away, he said lightly. Windblade. The voice fell, and several huge amounts of dark blue wind blades appeared in front of Lin instantly, exuding strong energy fluctuations. With a change of mind, the wind blade hit the destroyer at high speed. Bang! 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 The metal of the wind blade and the body of the destroyer made a violent noise. The destroyer's body has scratches on the metal surface of the 873 body. But soon, the metal returned to its original state under the surging like water. Lin was not surprised by this, it was a tentative attack. Looking at the galloping destroyer, he continued to speak lightly. Crimson rope. In an instant, a large amount of crimson energy ropes appeared in front of Lin, and then flew towards the destroyer at high speed. Seeing this, the destroyer stared at a large number of crimson long ropes, emitting a powerful laser. However, only a few crimson long ropes were destroyed, and the remaining long ropes began to bind the limbs of the destroyer, restricting his movements. Collapse. 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 The bound destroyer kept stretching his body, breaking the long ropes tied to his body one by one, making a crisp sound. At the same time, the galloping pace of the original destroyer was restricted. Seeing this, Lin nodded slightly and continued, 10 times increase. Lightning strike. 35. In an instant, several black thunderbolts appeared in the sky, exuding an aura of destruction, directly hitting the destroyer. Bang. 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 One after another thunder struck the destroyer, making noises. Lin could see with the naked eye that holes appeared on the surface of the destroyer, and he nodded slightly in satisfaction. Immediately afterwards, his face changed slightly. Seeing that the surface of destroyer's metal body was surging like flowing water, the holes in his body were quickly closed. Advertisement not only a little distressed. This guy, the defense is too entangled, this is still under the premise of no one's control. If someone really wears it, it will activate the true form of the destroyer. I'm afraid it's enough. Can only be. Lin turned to glance at Thor's expression. Well, I found that Thor's expression was a little ugly. If I guessed correctly, it should be that I saw the power of thunder just now, and I thought of something. Then, before he had time to think deeply, he heard heavy footsteps in the distance. Lin saw that the destroyer, who had recovered to the original state, was galloping towards him in great strides, with strong energy fluctuations in his eyes. Boom. As soon as the laser arrives, it hits the face directly. Seeing this, Lin's face changed slightly, and he said quickly. Defense. A short distance away, space refraction. The moment the voice fell, a pale golden shield appeared in the distance from Lin. In less than 2 or 3 seconds of stalemate with the laser, it burst with a bang. Immediately afterwards, visible to the naked eye, the speed of laser spread began to slow down significantly. This is what space does, delaying the distance between the two. Then, as the space began to distort, the laser was instantly refracted into the air, and Lin nodded slightly. Looking at the destroyer who began to emit strong energy fluctuations all over his body. Say it out loud. 10x increase, 8 golden locks. Repression. The voice fell, and countless golden lights emanated from the sky above the destroyer. Immediately afterwards, a large number of golden lights were inserted into the ground like divine swords emitting 8,000 feet of light. Outlined one after another strange trajectory, suddenly, 8 giant gates were formed, and each gate had a large golden lock flashing non-stop. Exudes a powerful coercion. Then, the destroyer, who was in the middle of the earth, was suppressed to the ground by the 8 gates. When Lin saw this, a faint smile floated on his face, which was the latest result of his recent research on speaking out. The previous attack was still too blunt. Recently, I have studied some mysticism knowledge, plus some memories of the previous life. Form a more powerful combat force by speaking out and following the law. Advertisement tried it today, and it was amazing. Lin looked at the destroyer who was struggling on the ground and spat out faintly. Dimensional slash. Split. Suddenly, everyone seemed to see distortions in the air, and black cracks flashed. Then several black lines quickly hit the destroyer. Immediately afterwards, the limbs of the destroyer lying on the ground were suddenly cut off. Then, as if being controlled, it was split into 5 pieces, which were suppressed by the 8 golden locks. Although he was still struggling, it was obvious that he was powerless. Seeing this, Lin glanced at Thor, who was still underground, and sighed. It seems that this time, the other party is afraid that awakening can't be done. But, exactly what he wanted. The longer Thor stays on Earth, the more susceptible he is to the influence of Earth's civilization, or the influence of love. At that time, some plans that are beneficial to both sides can be gradually launched. 18. Lin's face suddenly turned ugly, the destroyer who had been suppressed by the 8 golden chains. It suddenly exudes extremely strong energy fluctuations, as if something was turned on, and a new round of outbreaks began. It wouldn't be that Odin knew the current destroyer wouldn't work and had to activate the backhand. Lin's thoughts changed, and his face became even more ugly. No martial arts. Before I could think about it, I saw the destroyer who had been suppressed by the 8 gates golden lock array, split 5.8. Suddenly there was a dazzling light. Boom. Huge amounts of energy directly blasted the 8 golden locks. The rapid spread of a large number of energy fluctuations made Lin talk subconsciously. Defense. In an instant, a light golden shield rose in front of everyone to block the energy impact. Soon, Lin saw the destroyer return to its original shape, and the silver-white metal surface turned dark gray. And a large number of dark red runes continued to emerge. And he started to hold a dark red long sword and a dark black shield in his hand. Seeing this scene, I perceived the powerful coercion emanating from the destroyer. Lin murmured. Broken. It's on fire. Chapter 106. Furious attack. Difficult repairing power. Lin looked at the dark gray destroyer armor with a strong coercion all over his body, holding a long sword and a shield. Turning his head to the Thor below and asking loudly, "Thor, what happened to your father's armor? If you have any information, say it quickly." Thor heard Lin's question. His face was ugly, but his tone was very surprised, and he even replied incredulously. "Lin, pay attention. This is the destroyer, go into war mode." Before it was just a normal mode, and the means of attack were relatively simple. But after entering the war mode, the killing will be carried out spontaneously and indiscriminately, and the attack and defense power will be greatly enhanced. You must pay attention. Immediately afterwards, Thor recited a few words to Sif and the others next to him. Sif, Vorstadda, and Fandral all looked at each other, holding a long sword and shield in their hands, and jumped straight into the air, fighting alongside Lin. Sif glanced at Lin, then said, "Lin, you are a mighty magician. Trouble you to launch a powerful attack first, drag O2 to delay the destroyer's footsteps, and we will fight in close quarters here." Hearing what Sif said, Lin nodded slightly, then looked at the advancing destroyer. Said softly, "10x increase. 5, Thunderbolt." The voice fell, and in an instant, a large black cloud appeared in the sky, thunder roared, and dark black lightning continued to emerge in the dark cloud, exuding an aura of destruction. Soon, along with the crazy rolling of the dark clouds, a deep black thunder continued to bombard the destroyer. Seeing this, the destroyer directly raised the shield in his hand, activated the energy, and instantly appeared huge amounts of crimson shields. Thunder continued to fall like raindrops, and the dark black lightning and the crimson defensive cover kept colliding. Boom! 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 The impact produced a deafening sound, and the sound continued to spread, enough to make ordinary people bleed. Lin watched with a satisfied smile as the crimson protective cover was gradually stirred up by a large amount of thunder, and soon it was on the verge of shattering. Immediately after, the destroyer seemed to be provoked, waving the long sword in his hand and slashing towards the dark clouds in the air. In an instant, a crimson sword light directly penetrated the dark cloud, and in an instant, the sword light burst, the dark cloud dispersed, and the thunder stopped. Lin murmured badly, "Advertisement sure enough, the destruction armor in the state of war is very tricky." Then, Lin watched the three warriors Sif and Asgard, holding the long sword shield, and rushed forward. Somewhat curious, he felt that the destroyer's armor was very difficult, and he did not know how the 4 Asgard warriors would deal with it. After all, the previous life is just a movie, and there are still obvious differences in the real world. Soon, Lin watched as Sif held the long sword and struck the destroyer's neck directly. Boom! The long sword and metal made a crisp sound, and there were clearly visible scratches on the dark gray neck of the destroyer. Immediately afterwards, the destroyer seemed to perceive something, and the long sword in his hand immediately merged into his arm, and then reached out and grabbed Vorstadda. At the same time, Vorstadda, Fandral, and Hogun attacked the destroyer's arm directly, as if to cut it off. 18. With the crisp sound of the weapon and the metal arm, the greatest power is only to cut into the metal arm without cutting it. Then the destroyer stretched out his hand, and the 3 Asgard warriors flew out. Sif saw that the destroyer was about to bring an attack, and immediately dodged. Holding the shield, continued to attack the destroyer's head. With his sensitive skills, he quickly left a large number of sword marks on the destroyer's head. Immediately afterwards, destroyer's pupils began to emit fire, accompanied by a large amount of energy fluctuations. Lasers appeared and hit Sif. Sif quickly blocked the laser with his shield. The quality of the shield is good, but the shield itself is knocked into the air. Seeing this, Lin shook her head helplessly. Originally thought that these 4 Asgard warriors can make people a little bit brilliant. Hey, still have to rely on themselves. Lin's face was straight, and she said lightly to the destroyer. 10 times increase. 99, 5 Sacred Mountains suppression. The voice fell, and 5 looming mountain peak reflections appeared in the sky. As the energy continues to gather, it becomes more and more solid. On the peaks, the ancient characters of Mount Tai, Mount Hua, Mount Song, Mount Heng and Mount Heng are recorded respectively. Immediately after, the 5 mountains began to rotate, and they became faster and faster, vaguely blending into one. The destroyer below seemed to feel the amazing power of the 5 sacred mountains. Advertisement. He stretched out his hand directly, summoned the long sword in his body, jumped up directly, swung several swords in a row, and slashed towards the mountains one after another. Boom! 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 When the sword collided with the 5 sacred mountains, there was a deafening sound. Lin clearly saw that the 5 sacred mountains, which were formed by energy, began to crack. I'm afraid this blow will fail. Lin was a little surprised by this, but still expected. After all, the previous 8 golden locks were also broken, and this time it was inevitable that the same accident would occur. Seeing this, Lin said softly directly, "Red flames burn the sky. Frost attack, rapid blades, thunder." 35. As Lin kept spitting out words, a large amount of energy fluctuations began to appear around the destroyer. Immediately afterwards, the red and hot flames swept through the destroyer, and then the silver-white cold air hit the destroyer, alternating between cold and heat, making a crisp sound. Then there were a lot of huge amounts of dark blue wind blades in the sky, and they violently attacked, and the dark clouds gathered a lot of thunder and kept hitting the destroyer 873. Under the massive energy attack, the entire battlefield was colorful, very dazzling and dizzying. Thor and the three warriors of Asgard below the battlefield were a little stunned, and the military personnel monitoring from a distance and Phil Coulson of S.H.I.E.L.D. were shocked. After a large amount of energy attacked, it slowly fell as the yellow sand filled the sky. Vaguely revealed a huge and dilapidated figure. Lin frowned a little with his far superior vision. He found that the previous massive energy attack had indeed caused serious damage to the destroyer. But the destroyer seems to be constantly absorbing the energy scattered around and repairing itself. So he couldn't help but smash his teeth. Difficult. With this amazing repairing power, we still don't know when this war will end. Soon, in the eyes of everyone, the figure of the destroyer began to clearly emerge. Everyone watched the destroyer's process of repairing his own damage, and his eyes revealed great surprise, even panic and despair. In their opinion, the power of the series of attacks just now was no less than that of a nuclear bomb, and it was still the same. Seeing this, Thor clenched his fists, his eyes revealing a hint of desperation. Directly shouted to Lin, who was high in the sky. Lin, stop for a moment. I want to talk to Loki. Chapter 107 Thor's Entrustment, Receive Rewards. After Lin heard what Thor said, after thinking for a while, he nodded and stopped attacking. Thor looked around for a week, and saw that a small town was completely reduced to ruins under the attack of a large number of shells and energy, full of yellow sand, and there was no trace of the original town at all. A look of sadness flashed in his eyes. Directly striding towards the destroyer also returned to its original state at the moment, watching Thor continue to move forward and stop attacking. After walking in front of the destroyer, his eyes were fixed on the destroyer, as if he could see Loki's figure through his back. Said directly, Loki, no matter what I did wrong. Whatever I do, let you do it. I'm really sorry. 55. I don't want to see this senseless war continue. 39. Kill me. It's all over. Thor saw that the original attack of the destroyer began to gradually disappear, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Immediately after, boom, the destroyer punches Thor's body directly. Lin couldn't bear to look straight. Although I saw this situation in the movie, when it actually appeared, I still felt very speechless. Just Loki. Lin can only say that the younger brother is the younger brother. In Lin's perception, Thor's vitals plummeted, although he knew Thor was about to awakening. But still put on a fighting stance, because the destroyer was eyeing him again. After the violent attack just now, Loki wanted to kill him. It didn't take long. Lin felt Thor and Mjolnir's position exuded a lot of energy fluctuations. In the sky, dark clouds gathered and thunder surged. Well, for the occasion, should I say something at this moment? Thor is back. Thoughts flashed in Lin's mind, and some groaned. Soon, Lin saw Thor restored to normal, holding Mjolnir, exuding a lot of thunder. Straight up into the air and hit the destroyer directly. Boom. Advertisement accompanied by a large amount of thunder, the energy exploded, and the destroyer was directly destroyed. Seeing this, Lin couldn't help but complain. I just fought, playing the war form. Thor hits directly, dealing with the normal form. This doesn't make it obvious that the food is served by people. But there was a smile on Lin's face as he saw the wreckage of the destroyer scattered all around. Either way, there's definitely a loot this time around. Seeing Thor returning, Lin also returned to the ground. Watching Thor say a word to himself and the Asgards, Roar immediately flew to the S.H.I.E.L.D. camp. Then, Lin looked helplessly at Sif with a dark face and said softly, Space Shuttle. The voice fell. In front of everyone appeared a transmission channel with sparks. All to see, under the watchful eyes of Caecilius and Serbia. Thor and Jane hug each other and are constantly throwing dog food. Lin shook her head slightly, took out her phone and sent a message. Then he stepped directly into S.H.I.E.L.D.'s camp, and everyone followed. Well, Sif's face was getting darker, and Thor didn't seem to notice anything. Continued to sprinkle dog food. After a while, as if feeling the gaze of the person next to him, the two embarrassedly separated. Thor then shouted at Lin. Lin, my friend, sorry to bother you this time. I have something to do this time. Next time I invite you to Asgard for a drink. After speaking, he came over and hugged Lin very boldly. He whispered something in his ear in front of Lin. Lin, please help me take care of Jane. 99 Lin heard that and nodded with a smile. Well, it seems that I still noticed Sif's expression. Thor then said a few more words to Jane. Then he glanced at Phil Coulson, nodded slightly, and said a few words of gratitude. Look at the three warriors of Asgard and Sif, and then collectively walked to the open space outside. Roar snorted. Held him. It didn't take long for Lin to see that a rainbow beam of light enveloped Thor and the others along with the massive energy fluctuations. Suddenly, it disappeared. Advertisement. Seeing this, Lin glanced at the message sent by the phone with a faint smile on her face. Report to the boss, all the wreckage of the destroyer has been collected. Transferring, seeing that Phil Coulson behind him was about to come forward, he put on a friendly smile and then said gently, Mr. Lin, about the destroyer. Hearing this, Lin made a gesture to shut up and said to Phil Coulson. Give you 1/3, and you and the military will share it. For anything else, let Nick Fury contact me. Saying that, gave Caecilius a look. Seeing this, Caecilius directly started holding the sling ring, kept drawing circles, and opened the transmission channel with sparks. Lin saw Kamar Taj across the teleportation channel, many pictures of magician training, and strode over excitedly. Caecilius followed. Seeing this, Phil Coulson's eyes lit up, staring at the opposite picture, as if to engrave it deeply in his mind. Soon, the transmission channel disappeared. At the moment Lin, under some magician gazes, followed Caecilius with excitement as he trotted towards the depths of Kamar Taj. Well, the mission is complete, it's time to collect the mission prize. This is the core factor of breaking through the fifth order of speech, and it cannot be ignored. Soon, we came to the tea room where the Ancient One magician was. After entering the tea room, I saw the Ancient One magician who was reading a book. Lin said happily to the Ancient One magician. Backquote, Sorcerer Supreme, mission accomplished. Speaking, Lin seemed a little embarrassed and kept rubbing her hands. After seeing it, Ancient One magician said gently with a faint smile on his face. This is your reward, Qian Zhao Zhao, give you. At the same time, the Ancient One magician reached out, a brown box in my hand, and floated towards Lin. At the moment, Lin heard the sound of the system notification in her mind, and a smile formed on the corner of her mouth. Ding, found a source of power, attribute, time, quality, extremely high. The God King Odin was watching from behind, and there was no way Thor could be a problem. The mission this time, to be honest, is purely a cutscene. Be prepared to continue researching in depth later. Ancient One magician's favor, he must admit. Well, this time, I have tasted the sweetness of mysticism knowledge and the follow-through. Afterwards, after a few conversations with Ancient One magician, he applied to borrow a few more magician books and then returned to Los Angeles. Meet the needs of promotion to the 5th rank, FFT. After receiving the wooden box, Lin gave Ancient One magician a deep bow in his storage space to express his gratitude. Chapter 108 Annex Hydra. Lin returned to her own office in Los Angeles. Others were a little excited and took out the brown wooden box hidden in the space. Feeling the aura of a lot of rune blockades on the wooden box, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Then, open the wooden box directly and see inside the wooden box. There was a green light that kept moving. Exuding an ancient aura, Lin closed his eyes slightly and took a closer look. It was as if time was constantly passing by. Forward, backward, still, jump. Seeing this, Lin communicated directly with the system, staring at the source of time, and ordered. System, absorb the power of the source. In an instant, the time source power in the wooden box disappeared, and a prompt sound came from my mind. Ding, absorb a share of the high-quality source power. Then, Lin asked the system, what are the conditions required to be promoted to rank 5? Ding, host. 5-level speech and law is needed. 3 high-quality source power with different attributes, 100 billion wealth value, 5. Currently has a high-quality time source power, 37.35 billion wealth value. Hearing the system's reply, Lin thought to himself. The 877 forces of the other 2 high-quality sources can only wait until the New York War is on. So, now the most important thing is wealth value. Recently, at present, his actual assets have reached more than 370 billion yuan. But basically reached a bottleneck. Although he has a lot of extremely precious memories of future industry development in his previous life, he has traveled since 2007 to the present, which is 2011. In almost 3 or 4 years, a large group with a market value of nearly 1 trillion has developed. With normal business development, it has almost reached its limit. Well, valuation is valuation and reality is reality. The market valuation is nearly 1 trillion, but in fact Lin has more than 370 billion assets. Although many new industries are invested in, it will take time to produce results. Advertisement. If you want to save trillions of assets by next year, 2012, before the New York War, you must use other means. Take, for example, the recent annexation of Hammer Industries. According to information collected by Lin, now that Iron Man has defeated Whiplash, Justin Hammer has officially been arrested. He has also started the process of annexation, gaining huge amounts of assets. But if you want to swallow it completely, you still need to use some means. It's not enough to take SHIELD's lightning resistance, you need to be hard on yourself. The strength of the Shining Star Group or Lin is also extremely important. That's why, this time, Lin fought the Destroyer directly in front of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the military. No scruples, no matter how powerful it is, how to use it, and not at all worried about causing others jealousy. In other words, Lin was trying to take advantage of the fear of others. To escort this annexation, it is believed that most of the capital forces now more or less get the video information of Lin's War Destroyer from the military. It was revealed that Lin's strength was enough to cause everyone's fear. Especially for Hydra, never dared to make too many ideas. Because the attack power he displayed was completely comparable to that of a nuclear bomb. More importantly, he used the space shuttle ability a lot in front of everyone. It shows that he is not only strong in attack and defense, but also can escape from predicament at any time. Even if a nuclear bomb hit him in person, he would be able to escape smoothly. Lin couldn't believe it, just relying on this combat power that could be called the pinnacle on Earth, it still couldn't protect a process of annexation. At the same time, the following series of plans can be negotiated with other capitals with powerful force. For example, exception of Hydra assets. You must know that it is almost difficult to plunder a large amount of assets in an open and honest way, unless it is the assets of terrorists. As long as the communication is appropriate in advance, there is no scruples in annexing them. To be honest, Lin also thought about whether to secretly control others, but it didn't take long before she gave up. It's not that you don't want to start, purely he, ACFI, doesn't know how deep the water of the Earth is. In case a god or a messy extraordinary powerhouse pops up behind the top power capital. As far as he knew, there was a mysterious 10-ring gang in the memory of his previous life. As another example, there is a group of Egyptian gods involved in the superhero of the Moon Knight. And so on, where a god pops up, or a mysterious necromancer, and so on. Although Lin is not afraid, but it is troublesome. Advertisement: once the two forces are at war, only damage will be brought, unless one completely annesses the other. The time spent in the middle is completely incalculable. Because the opponent will not only fight, but also run. In case of secretly attacking the Xingyao group, Lin would not be able to prevent it. Therefore, we can only seek development in an open and honest way, and look for some forces with a clear foundation to annex. However, this is not a serious problem. After the annexation of Hanmer Industries, his assets can basically increase by about 200 billion yuan. In other words, he can hold about 60 billion worth of wealth. The remaining 400 billion assets can probably be obtained through Hydra. It's really not possible, and then go to fight the autumn wind. I believe that some people should have no resistance to products that prolong life, and they can sell a lot. Well, although there are many ways for Marvel to prolong life, the ones without damage should still be more precious. It is basically guaranteed to gather enough wealth before next year's New York War. Once Loki arrives with the Mind Gem, Lin immediately upgrades to the Fifth Order language. At that time, I can't say that the strength can be comparable to that of Odin and Ancient One, but they can basically fight for a while. Mind so. Lin asked Vera. Vera, now report on the annexation of Hanmer Industries. Soon, a soft voice came. Okay, sir. Now, about 30% of Hanmer Industries has been successfully annexed, 15% of S.H.I.E.L.D., 5% of Stark Industries, and about 20% of other capital forces. The remaining 30% of Hanmer Industrial's assets are rapidly being divided up. However, there is good news. Influenced by the Great War in Mexico, 5. He could have been sneak attacked by Hydra before, although he dug a few times later. According to the current progress, it is expected to obtain the remaining 20% of Hanmer's assets, 99. This time basically got half of the assets of Hanmer Industries, which is enough. The rest of the wealth will start with Hydra, but this time, don't completely swallow his Baron Strucker, a Hydra. He vowed not to give up. Other capital forces have shown their favor, and the pace of annexation has slowed down significantly, including S.H.I.E.L.D., 5. When Lin heard this, a smile appeared in his eyes. With Hydra, his complex ingredients, let him escape. Chapter 109: Natasha Romanoff's probe. Depart for Antarctica. A week later, night, New York, Stark House, Tony's party. At this moment, Lin looked at the party that was obviously serious and shook his head helplessly. Well, this party basically didn't have too many models, but Oni-san called a few, but not many. Asterisk asterisk. Nostalgia for the flowers, Tony officially bid farewell. Trapped in a grave called love, and he was still roaming freely in the forest. Soon, watching Tony get separated from his buddy Rhodes. Lin stepped forward, raised his glass, and gave it a light touch. He took a sip of the red wine in his glass and said with a smile. Tony, congratulations on finding the new element. This time, Stark Industries will usher in a new beginning. Said you also said with a smile. Tongshi, your industrial shares in Stark are not low. Also, you annexed Hanmer Industries some time ago, I believe you have gained a lot. At least half of them have entered your Shining Star Group, 35. Lin smiled when he heard this, responded with a few words, and took another drink and took a sip. Then he left and chatted with Pepper, the current CEO of Stark Industries. Pepper, how are you feeling lately? How does the CEO position fit in? Tony is fine now. When are you going to get married? Pepper heard Lin's joke, a shyness flashed on his face, and then said gently. Everything feels good. Now Tony feels so much better than before, 35. Then, as if he wanted to change the subject, he asked curiously. By the way, how's Jessica doing? I don't seem to have seen her these days. I didn't seem to have come over to invite her this time. Hearing this, Lin's face froze, then returned to normal and said softly. It's all right, maybe I'm making some small emotions. When the time comes, let's talk and untie the knot. Well, Jessica, after Frank's training, was put in New York by him to work on some special operations teams. Basically no big deal, because Lin and Tony have a good relationship. So Pepper gradually got to know Jessica too. Because of their similar personalities, the two gradually became friends. However, Lin felt that the key reason why the two became friends was that one complained about Tony and the other complained about Lin. Advertisement. During the process of complaining about each other, the relationship suddenly improved. For Jessica, Lin is also a little distressed. Originally, the two were just purely learning and communicating, but they may have left a deep impression on her before. It seems that Jessica has real feelings for herself. Now he felt a little troubled. He has always been the master who does not touch his body, and he is not ready to stop. However, I haven't found a suitable solution, so let's drag it. Time is the cure for everything. Well, the big deal is to study and communicate well tonight. All problems can be solved. Mind so. Start looking for other people to start drinking. What? Lin whimpered lightly. He just discovered the trace of Natasha Romanoff. What's the matter? Has the other party returned to S.H.I.E.L.D.? Should not be all. Thinking of this, Lin directly picked up a glass of wine, then walked to Black Widow Natasha Romanoff and said with a smile. How about this secretary Natasha Romanoff, interested in a drink? Natasha Romanoff rolled her eyes, touched her glass, and took a sip. Seeing this, Lin said jokingly, I see you're still at Stark Industries. Do you feel that the job of a secretary is much better than that of an agent? Are you ready to return to Xingyao? 35? Don't worry, the work will definitely not be as much as it used to be. 99. After Natasha heard it, she also said with a smile. Boss, still no, being your secretary is more tiring than an agent. By the way, ask something. I heard from Phil Coulson that you guys at BlackRock Security are looking for something in Antarctica. What are you looking for? Is there a trace? Lin heard this, thought for a moment, and said with a smile. Well, maybe we're looking for the same thing. It depends on who finds it first. Why don't you tell me, what's the clue now on Phil Coulson's side? When the time comes, there will be gains, and I will never treat you badly. 35. The position of secretary is still reserved for you. Advertisement. A lot of salary and bonuses. Speaking of this, Lin's tone was obviously seductive. When Natasha Romanoff heard that, she gave Lin a roll of eyes and went to find Tony with a glass of wine. 0 for flowers. Well, it seems that Natasha Romanoff should talk to Tony about something besides trying him out this time. Wouldn't it be about the Avengers? Without thinking too much, Lin went directly to the other Oni-san with the wine glass in hand. Although there are few people, we can chat. As for the night, let's chat with Jessica. The next day, morning, Lin's villa. Lin took a shower and looked at Jessica, who was still sleeping on the bed, with a small smile floating on her face. It seems that the persuasion last night was very effective. Then go back to the study room of his villa. Sitting in the chair, I thought back to Natasha Romanoff looking for myself yesterday. 0 in his memory, the United States captain was indeed found, and it was led by Phil Coulson. He also sent Bucky and the members of the Special Forces team to find it. Even one of the Special Forces team members has the ability to explore the breath of life. But still no result. It's been half a year, but Bucky and the others should have made a lot of noise, otherwise, S.H.I.E.L.D. wouldn't run over and let Natasha Romanoff test him. Thinking back to this time, Phil Coulson should have almost found it. With that in mind, Lin asked Vera. Vera, report back to Bucky in their search for the captain of the United States. Okay, sir. According to the records, Bucky and the members of the Special Operations team followed the original plane where it fell, and kept exploring according to the current. 5. So far, 1/4 of the Antarctic area has been explored, but still no trace of the United States captain has been found. Hearing this, Lin pondered for a moment and then commanded slowly. Vera, contact Bucky and the others and ask them to post their current location. I'm going to find them now. Well, the United States Captain Steve Rogers, known as the enemy of Hydra, is a good opportunity. At least, have a good talk with S.H.I.E.L.D. soon. The computer automatically turned on, showing the location picture. At the same time, Vera replied. Okay sir, the contact has been completed, and the location has been sent to your computer. G. Chapter 110 Explore the Captain of the United States. Lin looked at the location and pictures displayed on the computer, and spit out 2 words lightly. Send. In an instant, a transmission channel with sparks appeared in the study. Immediately afterwards, a cold air came. Even with Lin strengthening several times of physical fitness, I feel a little cold. So, Lin said lightly, constant temperature. In an instant, a movable barrier appeared on the surface of the body, and the original cold air disappeared immediately. The ambient temperature feels just right. Then look at Bucky and others who are not far from the channel, and step directly to the teleportation channel. Walk towards Bucky and the members of the special team. Lin, here. Hearing Bucky's shout not far away, a small smile appeared on Lin's face. Soon, walking up to Bucky, a big hug came directly. Looking at Bucky's group of people wearing thick protective clothing, Lin faintly spit out the word, 8 and 90, to everyone. Constant temperature. In an instant, everyone felt that the original cold air disappeared immediately, as if they were carrying a portable heater, which was very comfortable. Lin smiled and told everyone can take off your thick clothes. 39. With me, it won't make everyone feel cold. 35. This way the movement is more sensitive. 55. Hearing what Lin said, Bucky took off his clothes first, followed by the other members of the Special Forces team. Lin nodded slightly, then asked Bucky, Any clues about Steve's trail? 35. Hearing Lynn's question, Bucky shook his head in distress and said helplessly, "Not yet. I've been looking for it for a long time, and I kept rummaging according to the words of those experts, but I didn't find the slightest trace." Hearing this, Lynn thought for a moment, then said, "I found some clues here. 5 should be able to indicate the approximate location." Hearing this, Bucky's eyes lit up obviously and asked immediately, "Lynn, where are you? Let's head off to find Steve now." Lynn smiled mysteriously, took out a computer that had been protected and blessed, and told Vera. "Vera, show the rough plan that S.H.I.E.L.D. Phil Coulson and the others collected." Advertisement, "Okay, Mr. 35, route is being sorted." Sent to computer. 39 hearing Vera's reply, he opened the route map and said to Bucky, "On our side, there is a prophecy that S.H.I.E.L.D. will come into contact with Steve's trail. So, 35, let's scan their search area in advance based on the search route of S.H.I.E.L.D. You can find Steve's trail." Hearing this, Bucky said excitedly, "Then what are you waiting for? Let's get going." After speaking, he called the special operations team directly, then ran into the car, prepared to drive, and searched for Steve's trail. Seeing this, Lynn shook her head helplessly. "After all, they're friends who live and die together. After searching for more than half a year, I finally found a clue, and some excitement is inevitable." Bucky got into the car and waved to Lynn to come up quickly. Seeing this, Lynn had a faint smile on her face and spit out 2 words. "Teleport." 99. The voice fell, and in the eyes of everyone, a huge amount of rectangular transmission channel with sparks appeared in front of them. Opposite the teleportation channel, it is also icy and snowy, but it is obviously another place. Lynn said loudly to everyone in the car, "Drive in." The opposite is the destination. 35 Bucky's members of the Special Forces team were a little stunned, but he quickly reacted and drove through the teleportation channel immediately. Seeing this, Lynn stepped forward, then inwardly meditate. Flight. With a change of mind, he immediately rose into the air. After everyone got out of the car, they were very envious and looked up at the black spot, which was Lynn's position. Lynn saw the surrounding ice and snow, the ground with almost no difference, frowned slightly, thought for a moment, and spit out a few words. Explore the breath of human life. The moment the words fell, almost everyone felt a wave of fluctuation sweeping over them, and then spreading to the distance. Lynn closed her eyes slightly, feeling the feedback from her brain. Well, in a radius of hundreds of miles, in addition to this group of life aura below, not far to the east, there is a group of life aura that is constantly moving, and the direction of movement is exactly where he is. Unsurprisingly, it should be someone from S.H.I.E.L.D. Perhaps, S.H.I.E.L.D. should have spotted him. This is not surprising, since they found Bucky's trail, they will naturally monitor. Advertisement like you would monitor Phil Coulson. Don't forget, S.H.I.E.L.D. has a lot of satellites in the sky. Even himself, he has not let Vera invade, no, he has borrowed 0. I didn't think much about it, I couldn't feel the breath of other human beings. He said loudly to the people below, "Bucky, you're guarding from here with the Special Forces. I looked elsewhere. If there is news, I will notify you to come and dig." After hearing the affirmative reply below, Lynn turned on the computer, looked at the location in the picture, and spit out 2 words lightly. Teleport. 39. The moment the words fell, a teleportation channel appeared in front of Lynn, and then flew over. Looked at the following as a new ice and snow. Well, there are also some penguins gathered in piles. Looking at the cute figures of penguins, there is an urge to hug them and touch them. But after thinking about it, he continued talking in the sky. Explore the breath of human life. When the words fell, a wave of fluctuation spread around him with him as the center. It is another hundreds of miles area, but there is still no human breath. Lynn was not surprised by this. After all, Bucky couldn't find it for more than half a year. He found it twice. Although he had ability blessing, he was not so lucky. Originally, he just wanted Bucky to look for it in advance. On the one hand, it was to kill Bucky. On the other hand, he also had something to do and was too lazy to look for it. But finding out that S.H.I.E.L.D. has been involved, and is very likely to find it, then he can't sit still. For the Captain of the United States, he has arrangements, and this is a very key figure. Therefore, he is ready to do it himself, and with the fourth order words and deeds, he is still very confident at 5.8. Immediately after, Lynn teleported dozens of times in a row to explore the breath of human life. An area of tens of thousands of kilometers has been explored. Finally, Lynn's eyes lit up, and in his perception, there was indeed a human breath not far in front of him, and he didn't move for a long time, which seemed a little faint. Completely in line with the characteristics of the United States captain alone, dormant for many years. Captain the United States Steve Rogers. Lynn looked at the silver-white ground, and could vaguely see some dark shadows, said lightly. In an instant, Lynn's eyes lit up, and he looked at the ground. Below the frozen ground was the wreckage of an airplane. Perspective, E. In the center, lies a body that emits a faint breath of life. At the side of the body, there is a shield engraved with a 5-pointed star. Fly directly to the position of perception breath from high altitude. Chapter 111 Deal. Wake up the Captain of the United States. After seeing the figure of the United States Captain Steve, Lynn rose into the air and continued, cut, split, float. 99. Suddenly, the frozen ground was suddenly cut into squares and floated to the side. The wreckage of the plane that was originally frozen underground began to split, revealing a huge amount of passage. Immediately afterwards, Captain America Steve's body floated out of the passage with a shield, floating tightly in front of Lynn. Lynn looked at the still very young and handsome Captain of the United States in front of him, perceiving the weak but resilient life in his body, and nodded slightly. With the body of the Captain of the United States, he slowly landed on the ground. Then, even faintly spit out 2 words, "Send." In an instant, a sparking teleportation tunnel with a rectangular doorframe appeared in front of Lynn. Looking at Bucky and the other 880 people on the opposite side, and then seeing a little further away, Phil Coulson and others are also waiting, with a faint smile on their faces. One step across the passage, the Captain of the United States also floated in midair, followed by him. Bucky saw Steve's body and strode forward in a moment of excitement. Walked up to Steve and stroked Steve's face lightly, making Lynn shiver a little. Can't help but complain, he is indeed a good friend who lives and dies together. Phil Coulson trotted all the way over, his expression was very excited, and before he had time to talk to himself, he quickly took a few self-portraits with the Captain of the United States with his mobile phone. Well, Bucky was filmed too. After filming, he quickly regained his excitement and said to Lynn very gratefully, "Mr. Lynn, thank you so much. If it weren't for you, we really might have given up on continuing to search for the United States captain. Now the captain is sleeping, do you want to bring back S.H.I.E.L.D.? Hearing SHIELD's technology, able to. Hearing this, Lynn looked at Phil Coulson playfully. Phil Coulson's tone was getting smaller and smaller, as if he knew that he couldn't keep fooling around, or that he couldn't convince Lynn. Looking at the silent Phil Coulson, Lynn said lightly, "This matter, let your director come to me to talk about it. I found people and I dug them out, it will be treated by me in the future. It's impossible for me to hand over people with just 2 or 3 sentences. Advertisement, you tell your chief what I said as it is." Hearing this, Phil Coulson's eyes lit up obviously, and he understood the hint in Lynn's mouth. It's okay to hand it over to S.H.I.E.L.D., but it's definitely not cheap. For Phil Coulson, the price was paid by S.H.I.E.L.D., not so much for him. It is enough to be able to see the captain at the end. Lynn looked at Phil Coulson's expression, as if he knew what he was thinking, and said jokingly, "Don't worry, no matter what. At the end, I must give you an autograph of the captain. Let you take good care of it." Hearing this, Phil Coulson shouted out subconsciously, "Really?" Immediately afterwards, his expression returned to normal, and he said gently, "Then thank you, Consultant Lynn." Hearing this, Lynn raised an eyebrow and said nothing more. "Well, it's all right, Lynn's call, just consult Lynn if anything happens." So polite, without thinking much, he turned his head and tried to wake Steve, but was careful not to endanger Steve's body. "Bucky seems to be in a dilemma." Lynn said, "Bucky, follow me back to the Shining Star Group, 55. I'm here to arrange Steve's recovery ceremony, 99. Guarantee his safe recovery." "Well, no problem, with SHIELD's technology, it can be safely recovered. Lynn has a keel, which means that even if he dies, he can be resurrected." Hearing what the Force Man said, Bucky gratefully forgot Lynn and said excitedly, "Okay, then I'll trouble you, Lynn. Now let's start preparing to go back." Saying that, Bucky looked at Lynn with expectant eyes, as if telling him to hurry up and open the space teleportation channel, send him directly back to the Shining Star Group, and start resuscitating Steve. Even feeling Bucky's thoughts, he glanced at Phil Coulson next to him. Glancing at the open space not far away, he said lightly, "Space teleportation." In an instant, in the sight of everyone, a huge rectangular transmission channel with sparks appeared in the open space. It's wide enough to let several cars pass side by side. On the opposite side is the training base of Xingyao Group Blackstone Security Company. A large number of special operations team members were very vigilant watching the space transmission channel that suddenly appeared. Advertisement, but he didn't act rashly, as if he knew who would open it. Lynn saw this in motion for Bucky and Steve to follow. Bucky and the others saw Lynn step directly into the teleportation tunnel, followed closely behind. Seeing this, Phil Coulson waved his hand directly, indicating that the others would also follow through the teleportation channel 0. Lynn didn't say much after seeing it. He's currently on a honeymoon with S.H.I.E.L.D., and it's not worth the damage to the little things. People just need to be here. Besides, the reason why he let Phil Coulson see the whole process of his rescue is to let Phil Coulson tell Nick Fury that the man is in his hands. If you want it, it's impossible without paying a lot of money. Well, maybe this time, the wealth value can make a lot of money. The plan behind, if you don't come in to carry the thunder, believe it or not, you won't give it to him. After seeing everyone pass, Lynn directly closed the transmission channel. The place that was originally cold began to gradually warm up. Some S.H.I.E.L.D. agents started to take off their thick protective clothing, thermal clothing, etc. Lynn glanced at it and walked directly with Bucky, thinking about the interior of the Blackstone Security Company building. Phil Coulson wanted to follow. 1. He was stopped by a security guard who looked at Lynn. Although he shouted a few times, Lynn pretended not to hear, and without turning his head, led Level 8 and Steve into the building. "Well, everyone let you see, you should report to the chief later, instead of following yourself to continue watching Steve Rogers." You must know that when it comes to the treasure of Kiel, he doesn't want to let the people of S.H.I.E.L.D. know too much. After entering the main building of Blackstone Security Company, I found a very spacious treatment room. Lynn motioned for Bucky to put Steve on the table and leave, ready to revive the United States captain. Seeing 5.8 Bucky slowly leaving, a faint smile floated across his face. Immediately, Lynn stretched out his palm, and a cut, crystal clear keel appeared, and then silently recited psychokinesis, controlling the keel to float above Steve's forehead. Use the words to speak with the law and speak lightly. Recovery. Restore. 35 The voice fell, and everyone could see it with the naked eye. The keel began to tremble violently, and a lot of energy left the keel and entered Steve's body. Soon, the originally crystal clear keel began to fade, and then it shattered into powder and entered Steve's body. But as the energy fluctuation gradually weakened, Lynn clearly perceived that the originally weak life breath began to expand rapidly. After reaching a certain level, it gradually becomes stable. After a while, under Bucky, Lynn watched. The United States Captain Steve Rogers slowly opened his eyes. Chapter 112 The Awakened Captain of the United States. Steve felt his head splitting at the moment, but he felt a warm energy surging through his body, gradually easing the pain. He seemed to feel that he had been asleep for a long time. But he seemed to remember that he had experienced a great battle not long ago, and he won. Not only defeated the opponent, but also grabbed a very precious treasure, Tesseract. But it seems, all this did not make him particularly happy. On the contrary, there is a deep sadness from the heart, but he can't remember it anyway. What's the matter? What exactly is it? There must be one thing I forgot. I must remember. This thing must be very important. Can't give up, can't forget. I seem to remember. The dance I remembered. Being alone, I seem to have failed her. That person is Peggy Carter. Suddenly, Steve opened 2 eyes, his brain memory quickly turned around, and he looked around for a week. I found myself in a room, a bit like a hospital, with a window not far away, revealing a warm glow. Sprinkled on him, he felt very comfortable, as if he hadn't felt the sun for a long time. There was a group of people around him, wearing clothes that felt inexplicably familiar. Kind of like a soldier, but not quite like it. The leader's face seems to be somewhat familiar, but it seems that he can't remember who it is. And the one next to him. Steve's pupils shrinked. Bucky. Really Bucky, isn't he dead? Fall off a cliff and die. By the way, in retrospect, I seem to have crashed in the end. Is it possible? Here is heaven. Steve got up quickly and walked towards Bucky. As for the lead young man, although I wanted to ask some questions, it was too late to say anything. He gave Bucky a hug directly, with a smile on his face, but it seemed to be mixed with sadness. His tone was happy and a little confused. Advertisement, Bucky, we meet again, did not expect. We met in such an environment. At this moment, Bucky seemed to understand what Steve meant, and explained it directly and quickly. Steve, it's okay, we're all alive. I'm still alive. Now you're in Los Angeles. Hearing this, Steve was obviously stunned for a moment, as if he had thought of something, and said in a joyful tone. Really? When can I see Peggy? 99? I remember, over a dance. I promised her that when I came back, I would make up for it. Hearing this, Lynn looked at Steve with joy on his face and directly interjected. Captain, I'm very sorry, maybe things are different from what you think. Steve heard what the young man in front of him said, and there was some doubt on his face. Although he didn't know this person, he obviously felt no hostility, and his face was a little familiar, but he couldn't recall when he had met him. At this moment, Bucky said bitterly when he saw Steve's puzzled face. Steve, you've been sleeping for 70 years. Hearing this, Steve's face clearly showed disbelief, but with the friendship between the two, he was slowly digesting this amazing piece of news, constantly muttering to himself. 70 years. 35, 70 years. Immediately after, he asked Bucky quickly, his tone was very urgent. How is Carter? Tell me, Bucky, tell me, Bucky. Hearing Steve's question, Bucky was a little hard to say, constantly hesitant. Seeing this, Lynn spoke slowly to Steve. Captain, calm down first, 95. M's Peggy Carter is still alive, but too old and currently in a state of extreme frailty, 55. I know how impatient you are, but Ms. Carter can't stand the extreme mood swings at the moment. If you want to see Ms. Carter, you need to communicate with us in advance. Prevent accidents. 35. Hearing this, Steve froze for a moment, as if thinking of something, and nodded bitterly. Then, he asked with gratitude and doubts, excuse me, are you? Advertisement. After Bucky next to him heard it, he said directly. Steve, he's Tyler's son. Lynn. Duncan, if it weren't for him, you might still be asleep now. Hearing this, Steve visibly fiddled, and then took a closer look at Lynn's face. It seems that he does have some resemblance to Taylor, no wonder he feels a bit similar in appearance. It turned out to be Taylor's son. However, he also understands that although he and Taylor have a good relationship, they have not met and communicated with each other for nearly 70 years. Calling Roar a nephew directly is very inappropriate and will only affect other people's bad feelings. So, Steve said softly to Lynn, this time, I really thank you, Lynn. Whatever happens in the future, as long as I can help, it is absolutely obligatory. Hearing this, a shallow smile appeared on Lin's face and nodded slightly. Well, Steve's favor, earned again. However, as the captain of the United States, the destiny child of the Marvel world, and the golden body that the United States has cast in the past 70 years, it is conceivable that the potential that can be tapped is of great value. Immediately after, Lin heard Steve ask, Lin, I'd like to meet Tyler. I wonder if you can help me. Hearing this, Bucky said directly, with a hint of sadness in his voice. Steve, Tyler passed away a few years ago. Hearing this, 880 Lin saw a flash of sadness on Steve's face. 70 years later, many old friends are dead. Whoever has experienced this fact will not turn a blind eye to it. Immediately after, Steve turned to Lin apologetically. Excuse me, my condolences, Lin. 35. However, I also want to go and sweep Taylor's grave. Then, the tone seemed a little sad. After all, 70 years, 35. Hearing this, Lin nodded, a trace of gentleness flashed across his face. He still likes the captain who is full of humanity. Well, as long as it doesn't disturb his plans, all is well. Then, Lin said gently, Captain, take a good rest first. Bucky can always be with you, chatting with you about 70 years of change. Later, I will contact Ms. Carter here and set a time for you to meet. 5. Hearing this, Steve nodded and said gratefully to Lin. Okay, then I'll trouble you, Lin. After speaking, he started chatting with Bucky next to him. He has a lot of things to know now. TT. Why is Bucky still alive? What exactly happened back then? Watching Steve and Bucky start chatting, Lin waved as the rest of the combat team backed off. Leave space for two people. Chapter 113 Encirclement and Suppression of Hydra, Back to Youth. 3 days later, Los Angeles Park. Steve and Bucky kept running around the park, their amazing speed, and the tourists walking next to them were amazed. They run really fast. They haven't walked enough 1 kilometer, and the other has run back and forth for 7 or 8 laps. As Steve and Bucky constantly ran, Steve's original isolation began to slowly dissipate. Steve has heard Bucky talk a lot since he woke up. Including the advancement of technology, the accident of Howard Stark, and even the fact that he was captured by Hydra and finally rescued by Lin. Well, as for the real reason for Howard's accident, Bucky finds it hard to say, he can only roughly skip it. And Steve, who hasn't woken up for 70 years, is entering Los Angeles again, as if entering a new world. Very surprised, novel, even apprehensive. So recently, I have been constantly communicating with Bucky about the changes in technology, the development of history, and the changes in the world. As well as changes in Peggy Carter. After getting a general understanding, with his amazing psychological quality, he calmed down all emotions and started the process of continuous learning. Well, Lin played a huge role in that. He directly gave Steve a smartphone and a laptop. Then asked Vera to give him permission and make a corresponding study plan. Although Steve felt very surprised that Vera existed. But the perception to the various convenient experiences and intelligence that Vera brought him. Think of Vera directly as a good friend. If you have any questions, ask them directly, and you will get an accurate answer quickly. To be honest, Lin once wanted to give Steve a villa. After all, villas are nothing to him. As a result, Steve felt a little embarrassed, didn't want to accept such a big offer, and rented an apartment directly. Well, he is now considered a training instructor for BlackRock Security. Usually, there are basically no major things, just to get a salary. Occasionally, it is to enjoy the admiration of the combat team members, or to explain some of their combat experience. Not too many tasks, enough study, and the company of his good friend Bucky made him feel very comfortable. There was only one thing that he had been looking forward to very much. Steve asks expectantly at Bucky, who starts walking. Bucky, Lin about arranging my meeting with Peggy. Advertisement, how's it going? When will I probably see Peggy? Bucky thought for a moment, and as he walked, he spoke to Steve next to him. I called and asked this morning. Lin said he could go to New York this afternoon, and Peggy was in her house, recuperating. 35. At the same time, I have done psychological counseling with Peggy in advance, and it will not affect too much. By the way, what I said to you last time has already penetrated with Lin. Lin didn't mean to say no, however, as a price, there is an event that may require you to attend. But, I believe you will be very interested in this matter. That's your old rival. Speaking of this, Bucky's eyes were obviously fierce, and Steve next to him seemed to know what he was thinking, and reached out and patted his shoulder to comfort him. Then, go on a walk. Also, chat about some interesting changes that have taken place over the years. In the afternoon, New York, at Peggy Carter's house. At this moment, Lin and Bucky next to him watched Steve slowly enter the front room. Bucky looked at Lin, who was interested in playing good Steve, and asked curiously. Lin, you're sure to have Steve in the Hydra campaign. 35. Hearing Bucky's question, he nodded and said with a smile. Definitely, Steve is the enemy of Hydra. It doesn't make sense for him to not participate in this event. Just sitting there from there, I believe, is a blow to Hydra. 5. Hearing this, Bucky nodded approvingly and then said gratefully. Thank you so much this time. Consume treasures like Keel to help Peggy regain her youth. I'm sure this will make Steve go crazy with joy. After all, he owes Peggy too much. Lynn heard it, smiled indifferently, and said lightly. Treasures are for use. Using it in the right place is the greatest respect for treasures. Advertisement, I believe that the captain will not let me down. Immediately afterwards, the tone was a little playful. You say, after Peggy regains her youth, will she marry the captain directly? Tut tut. 2 90-year-olds get married. 5. This is big news. Bucky shook his head helplessly when he heard this. He knew that Lynn had some bad tastes and liked to see other people's jokes. But, to be honest, he also wanted to see how the two got married. Well, it's purely a blessing, nothing else. Then, the two started chatting about Hydra. Bucky was once captured by Hydra and brainwashed into a weapon, so there are many secret places that he has heard or seen. This information was provided to Vera as intelligence, and even used it as a medium to collect a large number of Hydra assets. It doesn't matter if it's Baron Strucker's, as long as the war starts, even if it isn't, it has to be. Who made them all a snakehead of Hydra? Lynn believes in other smugglers, and after knowing this, she can't wait to kill Baron Strucker, of money, immediately, and then calm things down as soon as possible. Here, Pierce, the snakehead of the Snake Shield, will definitely make people do this. After all, things got a little bigger. Shield, Stark Industries, the military, the Shining Star Group, and even the FBI all united. Then he looked at himself and said gratefully, how can this be put to rest without paying a lot of money? After a short while, Lynn saw Steve come out of the house and come towards him. Now Hydra, his own plan to recast the Order has not officially started, and he is thinking about hiding. I don't know what Baron Strucker was thinking. I'm sorry to trouble you about Peggy's return to youth this time. Sacrifice a snakehead to prove that Hydra has completely perished, which is a good move for them. Lynn soft. Chapter 114 Recovery. Youth Power. Lynn smiled and nodded when she heard what Steve said. Then follow Steve into the house. Saw old lady Peggy Carter lying in bed. Peggy saw the young Lynn and said in a slightly old voice. Are you Tyler's son? Although Taylor and us got farther and farther away. But I still miss that time. I'm sorry to bother you this time, Lynn. Hearing this, Lynn replied with a smile. Ems Carter, don't worry. Even with my father Tyler Duncan, 35, it will definitely help you. After speaking, watching Peggy want to continue talking. Lynn made a gesture and said softly, not much to say now. When you're young again, you can have a good conversation, 35. Speaking, blinking, as if to imply something. Seeing this, Peggy also smiled and did not continue. Then, Lynn turned his head and whispered to Steve next to him. Captain, you should move further away, it is convenient for me to apply it, 35. The movement may be a bit loud by then, 35 then, blinking his eyes, he said jokingly. You can stay together forever when Ms. Carter regains her youth, 35. Steve heard a smile, then took a few steps back, then kept his eyes on Lynn and Peggy. Seeing this, Lynn smiled, looked at Ems Carter lying on the bed, and spit out 2 words lightly. Float. The moment the words fell, Peggy Carter floated from the bed in midair. Looking at Peggy, who was mentally prepared, but there was still a hint of surprise on her face, Lynn nodded slightly. He stretched out his hand and waved, and a large, crystal-clear keel appeared beside his hand. Then controlled the keel to float on Peggy's forehead and said lightly. Energy infusion, advertisement, full body recovery. As soon as the words fell, the originally crystal-clear keel suddenly emitted a lot of energy fluctuations, and then tightly surrounded Peggy's body. Flow into the body continuously. At this moment, Peggy felt that her old body was injected with energetic energy, as if every cell in her body was taking a hot bath, and it was very comfortable. Gradually, I felt a force emerge from my hands, including my legs. ACFI, at this moment, the keel, which was originally crystal clear, also began to dim slowly. Lynn felt the already very strong life breath in Peggy's body and couldn't help but nodded secretly. Then go on. Giving. Youth, in an instant, a blood-red energy emerged from the air and flowed into Peggy's body. Peggy suddenly felt that the very soothing energy in her body was continuously integrated into her body. Then, an extremely domineering force that seemed to transform the cells of his body began to emerge. It caused her great pain. Humph. Peggy began to groan, relying on her willpower as an agent for many years, to hold back the pain that was enough to make ordinary people cry. With a muffled sound, Steve heard what seemed to be a little heartache, but it was explained before that this was a necessary process of transformation. He turned his head and couldn't bear to look directly. However, soon the blood-red power began to fade away, and Peggy's pain became weaker and weaker. As Steve and Lynn watched, the apparently old face had begun to look younger. 60 years old, 50 years old, 30 years old, 20 years old. The body that had been shriveled became more and more plump and full, and the appearance became more and more youthful. Soon, change stops at a woman's youngest and most energetic moment. At this moment, Peggy seems to be a girl who has just turned 28, full of vitality, but mixed with a certain sense of maturity, exuding a strange charm. Steve was very excited when he saw this. Seeing this, Lynn said lightly. Integrate. The moment the words fell, the already very dim keel was completely smashed into powder and melted into Peggy's body. Then, Lynn said softly, "Wake up, 35 advertisement." With Lynn's thought, Peggy went straight back to the bed and opened her eyes. "Get up, stand in front of the bed and move your limbs, as if feeling the vitality of your body." Seeing this, Lynn took out a prepared mirror and handed it to Peggy with a smile. With some excitement, Peggy picked up the mirror and looked at her face. Seeing her youthful face, a bright smile appeared on her face. Steve was a little stunned to see this. Then, Peggy said very gratefully to Lynn, "Lynn, thank you so much, don't worry, I will cover up today's affairs. Guaranteed no one will find you." Well, it seems that Peggy can also think about how attractive rejuvenation is to some people. But these people, Lynn doesn't care, as long as he can pay the corresponding price, he is not impossible. But if the price is not enough, don't blame him for being ruthless. Looking at Peggy and Steve looking at each other, Lynn walked out of the room very wisely and closed the door tightly. At the moment of exiting, Lynn saw that the two were hugging each other and scattering dog food recklessly. Sure enough, youth is vitality. Peggy's rejuvenation is actually not a real-time reversal. It is not impossible to do so, but it consumes a lot of money. So Lynn chose a compromise, that is, endowed with a power called youth. The effect is actually very simple, that is, to restore the person's body and appearance to the peak state, and it is constant. Now it seems that the ability to add keel, the effect is very good. Maybe in the future, with this hand, he can collect hundreds of billions of wealth. Relevant thoughts flashed through his mind, and then his face straightened. He walked towards Bucky and said to Bucky, "Let's go back first. Captain and Peggy are hugging in the house, maybe they have to dance. Let's go back first and talk about other things after they're done." Bucky smiled when he heard what Lynn said, then turned and walked into the car. Later, there are more important things that require his attention. Then let the driver drive directly to his villa. Encircle Baron Strucker. It's a simple rest. Lynn followed, getting into his car. Well, after seeing the captain and they finished spreading the dog food, he also needs to vent now. Chapter 115 on how to extract the value of the Captain of the United States. The next day, in the morning, the Shining Star Group conference room. Lynn sat in his chair, looked at Phil Coulson across from him, and said with a smile, "Phil Coulson, have you received the captain's signature? How do you feel?" I specifically asked him to sign a model of the United States captain's shield. Phil Coulson said with a slightly excited tone after hearing it. "Yes, I got the captain's signature. It has been treasured by me." Hear this, Lynn quipped. "If that's the case, why don't you give me a clue?" Nick Fury wants the United States captain to join S.H.I.E.L.D. What's the bottom line? Hearing Lynn's joke, Phil Coulson smiled and said perfunctorily, "I don't know that either, it's just that the director asked me to send a message. That is to say, he agreed to the joint operation you proposed earlier, 35. Hearing this, Lynn raised an eyebrow and said softly, "This one? Are you sure there's nothing else going on? You know, Hydra, it was originally the goal of S.H.I.E.L.D. 35. Even if I don't say it, you should do it, but this time we will take the lead. 35. Hearing this, Phil Coulson patted his head and said suddenly, "Oh, I forgot, the commissioner has a point about the Hydra assets. 35. S.H.I.E.L.D. is willing to cooperate with Shining Star Group in annexation. 35. The specifics, the commissioner said, will definitely satisfy Lynn." Lynn was a little helpless when she heard this. The condition that S.H.I.E.L.D. agreed to was like squeezing toothpaste. Thinking of this, Lynn knocked on the table and said lightly, "I remember that S.H.I.E.L.D. seemed to be working on a mysterious cube you named Tesseract. It was taken up by Howard after the captain crashed." Hearing this, Phil Coulson's eyes were obviously a little nervous. He knew how much S.H.I.E.L.D. Lynn smiled and joked at Phil Coulson's apparently simple expression. "Don't worry, don't be nervous. I don't want Tesseract. 35 advertisement. I want people from Shining Star Group to also participate in the research. 35. Seeing Phil Coulson, visibly relieved, Lynn held up 3 fingers and continued. 3 months. As long as you let us Xingyao Group study for 3 months, that's fine. And it can be under your supervision to a certain extent." Phil Coulson listened, tapped his ear, and waited a moment. Seeing this, Lynn is not in a hurry. This matter will definitely apply for Nick Fury, but there is basically no problem. Soon Phil Coulson continued as if he heard something. "Lynn, your request," the commissioner agreed. However, the director of research data said it would still be shared. Hearing Nick Fury's conditions, Lynn thought briefly, knocked on the table, and agreed with a smile. "Okay, no problem. 35. Well, basically there will be no research, mainly for the power of the source. 3 months is enough." Immediately afterwards, Phil Coulson asked quickly, "In that case, can we meet the captain?" 39. Hearing this, Lynn raised an eyebrow and said jokingly, "Do you think the captain is too cheap? I just made a condition. And it's not giving me Tesseract yet, it's just research, and it's only been 3 months. Do you think it's a little too much?" Hearing this, Phil Coulson smirked visibly before continuing. "Lynn," the director said, "because of the close working relationship between Shining Star and S.H.I.E.L.D. 35. He said another order could be placed under the same conditions as before." Hearing this, Lynn nodded slightly, then said suddenly, "The military has also come to find me. about the captain's future arrangements. I suggest that you SHIELD and the military also communicate well. You know, from the very beginning, the captain was a member of the military. Hearing this, Phil Coulson was obviously stunned for a while, his face was a little ugly, and then he seemed to hear something and said slowly. Okay, thank you Consultant Lin for the reminder. We will communicate with the military. Well, how did the military know that it wasn't what you, Xingyao, wanted to tell? Didn't you just want to take the opportunity to gain more benefits? Believe it or not, we will join forces with the military to lower prices. Phil Coulson grumbled secretly. Advertisement 18. He also knew that it was almost impossible to unite. Captain the United States was a symbol that the military has always advocated. If he returned to the military, it would definitely cause a violent sensation. Afterwards, Phil Coulson began squeezing toothpaste with Lin one by one, trying to get the captain to join SHIELD at the least cost. 0. For flowers. Lin was also really impatient with Phil Coulson's attitude, and called the negotiating room directly to negotiate. He came here before, and the focus was on Tesseract. After talking about this, the rest was left to his subordinates to talk about. With the arrival of the professional negotiators, Lin began to walk out of the office, asking Phil Coulson to engage them in a war of words. And he walked into another meeting room with a smile. That conference room awaits. Military General Ross. Well, to sell goods, you have to shop around. Best to sell 3 at a time. In the end, the more you earn, the better. After a short while, Lin walked out of the meeting room very satisfied. 0. He is still a man of the military, much better than the people of SHIELD. Tut tut. Directly placing a large number of orders, it is a bit inhumane. And he voluntarily agreed to communicate with SHIELD. And he just had a chat with Steve and told him not to turn down a job offer in the military. Isn't that simple? Just based on the friendship between the two now, you don't even need to fool around, just say it directly and it's okay. Well, let Peggy return to youth, let the two live a happy and sweet life. Lin has this confidence. A week later, SHIELD in a mysterious base. Lin follows Phil Coulson, followed by a group of scientists, into a secret research environment. Lin looked at the blue cube floating in midair not far away, and there was a glimmer of obsession in his eyes. And Lin himself not only pulled the military and SHIELD into the campaign to suppress Hydra, but also received large orders from both parties, and more importantly, SHIELD promised to provide certain convenience in the subsequent annexation. Without thinking deeply, Phil Coulson soon stopped. Space gem of Tesseract, or rather, in short, selling the captain of the United States directly increased his assets by 30 billion, not to mention that there are still a lot of assets waiting to be annexed. Simply put, it is to provide some legal ways and means. Well, SHIELD is constantly communicating with the military these days. It was finally determined that Captain the United States would join both the military and the SHIELD in one position each.